Good evening. We'd like to welcome you all to the March 4th monthly meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. The open meeting law requires that we notify you, the public, that a recording of this meeting is being made by commission staff, and the meeting is now called to order. My name is Linda Eastley, co-chair of the BCDC. I'd love to thank the commissioners for their professional guidance tonight that helps shape our city of Boston into a more beautiful, sustainable, and equitable city for all of its citizens. Commissioners, tonight we have a very long agenda with 4 projects. 1 is coming back to us for a recommendation and 3 are new. And then at the end of the meeting, we also have an informational presentation about Article 80 modernization. So to that end, we'll be doing our best to keep time and making sure that we're able to get to all of the business that we have tonight. I wanted to start with a roll call, and if commissioners could please say present as I call your name. I know we'll have some commissioners joining a little later on in the meeting. Jonathan Evans.
Present.
Shauna Gilly-Smith.
Present.
McYoung Kim.
Present.
Has Kathy Cotteritas joined?
Yes, and present.
Hi, Kathy. Anne Marie Lubenow will be joining in a little bit. Has David Manfredi joined? Catherine Morris will be joining a little later. Bill Ron.
Present.
Laura Solano.
Present.
Kirk Sykes.
Present.
And myself, Linda Eastley, present. To start off our meeting, we have several meeting minutes to approve, and I'm going to read the dates off, and then we'll conclude with a motion. So December 3rd, January 7th, and February 4th, monthly meeting minutes. December 17th, January 21st, and February 18th, Design Subcommittee Session A, and December 17th, January 21st, and February 18th, Design Subcommittee Session B. Can I get a motion to approve these meeting minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith?
Aye.
McYoung Kim?
Aye.
Kathy Cotteritas?
Aye.
Bill Ron?
Aye.
Laura Solano?
Aye.
Kirk Sykes?
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley. The minutes are approved. Thank you. Christine, I think we're ready to move on to a report from Review Committee for 3 new projects, which are 434 Jamaicaway Street, 151 Cambridge Street, and 920 Center Street. The last project, we have both Commissioners Kim and Haseen recused. We don't have recusals for the other 2 projects.
Actually, I believe Commissioner Evans will be recused from the 151 Cambridge Street, so let's just take them one at a time. Apologies. Per the regulations of Article 28 of the Boston Zoning Code, Planning Department staff have prepared the following recommendations for your consideration. A proposed project at 434 Jamaicaway Street, Jamaica Plain, also known as Rogerson-Beaufort House, seeking Article 80B entitlement, contemplates the demolition of an existing 3,250 square foot residential building and the development of approximately 158,000 square feet of healthcare and residential uses, approximately 66 memory care units and 67 affordable senior housing units, and 62 parking spaces in a single 7-story building on an approximately 3.2 acre site. The proponent filed a PNF on December 20th, 2024. Planning Department staff hosted a public meeting on February 6th, 2025. Planning Department staff recommend that the commission vote to review the proposed project.
Thank you, Christina. Is there a motion to review?
Motion to review.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith? Shauna? I see a thumbs up from Shauna. I think she's lost her audio. McYoung?
Aye.
Kathy Cotteritas?
Aye.
Bill Ron,
Aye.
Lara Solano,
Aye.
Kirk Sykes,
Aye.
and myself, Linda Eastley, aye. We will review. Next is 151 Cambridge Street.
A proposed project at 151 Cambridge Street in the West End, also known as the West End Library, seeking Article 80B entitlement, contemplates the demolition of an existing single-story public facility and the development of approximately 19,000 square feet of public facility, a public library branch, and 157,520 square feet of residential uses, or 119 affordable units in a single 14-story building on an approximately 0.51 acre site. The proponent filed a PNF on January 8, 2025. Planning Department staff hosted a public meeting on February 12, 2025. Planning Department staff recommend that the commission vote to review the proposed project.
Thank you. Is there a motion to review?
So moved.
To review.
A second?
Second.
And please say aye if you're in favor. Shauna Gilly-Smith,
Aye.
McYoung Kim,
Aye.
Kathy Kotaritis,
Aye.
Bill Ron,
Aye.
Lara Solano,
Aye.
Kirk Sykes,
Aye.
and myself, Linda Eastley, aye. We will review. And I've made a note that Commissioner Evans is now recused from that project. Our last one is 920 Center Street. Commissioners Kim and Haseen are both recused from that project.
Excellent. A proposed project at 920 Center Street, Jamaica Plain, seeking Article 80B entitlement, contemplates the renovation and conversion of an existing 50,000 square foot structure for residential use, or 38 units, and the development of approximately 171,000 square feet of residential use, or 85 units, and 118 parking spaces in a 4-story building on a 3.3 acre site. The proponent filed a PNF on February 7th, 2025. Planning Department staff hosted a public meeting on March 3rd, 2025. Planning Department staff recommend that the commission vote to review the proposed project.
Thanks, Christina. Is there a motion to review?
So moved. Motion to review.
And a second, please.
Second.
Thank you. Please say aye if you're in favor. Jonathan Evans,
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith,
Aye.
Kathy Kotaritis,
Aye.
Bill Ron,
Aye.
Lara Solano,
Aye.
Kirk Sykes. Kirk, are you able to vote?
Yep, I said aye.
Oh, sorry that I missed it.
No problem.
And myself, Linda Eastley, aye. We will review. The good news is, commissioners, we are now 8 minutes ahead of our schedule, so we're going to try to clip along. We wanted to start our presentations tonight with the Harvard University Alston Campus Institutional Master Plan. This is back in front of the full commission for a final recommendation. This is the proponent's 4th presentation to us at BCDC, and we have Commissioners Lubenow, Ron, and Solano recused, so we'd like to excuse them, but have them stay on for a recusal vote a little later. We have 3 commissioners that were present at the last subcommittee, Commissioners Evan, Kotaritis, and myself, and so just to put a pin in that, we will have you share your comments first after the proponent has finished with their presentation. And following that presentation, we'll also have an overview from the planning department staff. So I think we are ready to pull up that presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that my colleague can actually share the presentation. Is that possible?
Well,
Gabriel.
Sorry, can you give me a full Ken? What's the
Oh,
last name?
Gabriel Ramos is
Gabriel.
trying to share. Thank you so much. So with that, I just want to say good evening to the co-chairs and the commissioners and everyone. And speaking on behalf of the Harvard University team, we are delighted to return to the full BCDC Commission regarding Harvard's Alston Campus Institutional Master Plan. After having introduced the IMP to this body last spring, we've had 2 sessions with subcommittee. They've been productive meetings. And they really have pushed us to develop our thinking relating to how our future projects and campus systems work together to support a thriving public realm. So for tonight, we've tried to create a very succinct presentation to share the highlights of that process. And with that, I will hand it to Martin Zogren of Sasaki, who will walk you through our slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and thank you, Commissioner.
Martin, you're cutting out just a little bit on us. Sorry.
Can you hear me better? Is it better now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Tonight.
Oh, we've lost you again, Martin.
Okay. Sorry. How about now?
So far, so good.
So far, I'll try it again. Tonight, we'll overview the 2025 IMP process. We'll walk through the comments that we did hear from the BCDC commissioners, and we'll show you what those impacts were to our planning and thinking for the future of the IMP. We met with BCDC twice, subcommittee meetings. In the first meeting in November, we reviewed broadly sort of the massing of some of those 10-year projects, as well as long-term projects, the overall planning framework, and the campus systems, which knit everything together. In January, we focused more specifically on the athletics area, the siting and orientation of the tennis and squash racket center, as well as pedestrian circulation and wayfinding. We talked through the potential for crossings at Soldiers Field Road, but we also talked about the openings into the business campus for and along Western Avenue. We wanted to highlight the fact that there are concurrent planning processes underway, as most of us know. The IMP's area is indicated in number 1 in the upper left-hand corner, but we know that there are other processes going on. The planning study currently being undertaken by the City of Boston for Beacon Park Yard, as well as the planning in ERC, which falls into both the PDA boundary of 3.1 and then the ERC district and greenway planning, concurrent with the IMP and coordinated. We wanted to highlight these 6 projects which are being proposed as part of the 2025 IMP 10-year projects. 3 of those projects are being carried over from 2013. Those include HBS Faculty Administrative Office Building, the Gateway Project, Harvard Stadium renovation and addition, and newly proposed projects include the Tennis and Squash Racket Center, the Neola Field Support Building, and Crimson Catering and interior renovation. This gives us a picture of the long-term view beyond the horizon of the 10-year plan. It shows a potential build-out for the areas within the IMP and situates those 6 projects shown in the crimson color and the light pink in what will be their context. Some of the discussions and comments that were most productive from BCDC included, as indicated in the black color boxes here, the issue around porosity of Western Avenue to maintain and ensure that there is a campus feel and an openness into the HBS campus from across the ERC area. We want to make sure that we're aligning those planned institutional projects with future plans of development, such as surrounding the Gateway and what will emerge at Barry's Corner. We spent a lot of time talking about pedestrian connectivity in and around the athletics campus, which I'll mention again in just a minute, and the intuitive ways in which folks can find their way through the athletics, including the siting of buildings and newly located pathways. Broadly, Harvard is committed to ensuring that our long-term vision for the campus pedestrian network aligns with future city and DCR Soldiers Field crossings. So some of the diagrams which were greatly enhanced by the BCDC input through the series of meetings is one of these. This is the long-term planning block plan, which is to say a broad indication of how development should fill out, but without indications of specific buildings. Here, the orange organizing axes are consistent with the patterns today found on the campus. But the commissioners really indicated a desire to better understand what these organizing axes were and how they help the experience within the athletics area, as well as the open space along Western Avenue. The plan was updated, as indicated here, to show that greater porosity along Western Avenue. We've also importantly extended those organizing axes, we called it, specifically Harvard Way, into the athletic area coming from the Harvard Business School to align with many of the existing building entries and to organize new entries being proposed for the tennis, squash, and racket center, as well as Mignone. Also, there's an important access, which is indicated here from the Dillon Fieldhouse, closer to the Charles River, south to the McCurdy Outdoor Track, really picking up on an extension in the future of what will be Stadium Road, shown in that orange arrow. Another big sort of change that came about via the conversations with BCDC members is really understanding the existing network of pathways and movement for pedestrians, particularly through the athletic area. We wanted to study this in depth and really look at those opportunities for crossings, both at North Harvard and for Western Avenue, which we'll highlight here. So we really did sort of take a look very closely at the pedestrian networks moving through the athletics area to try to bring more coherence, again, in this long-term planning framework to what is a series of buildings which are often responding to solar angles and orientations and have a series of pre-existing fields. We improved the connectivity and legibility within that pedestrian area. We aligned the pedestrian connectivity with those future crossings by DCR or others, and also thought about the wayfinding opportunities within and around between Harvard Business School and the athletic areas, and those are highlighted in some of the yellow. The green dots show us those existing pedestrian crossings, the newer improved, specifically over at the ERC that we see, and then in the future, those new crossing opportunities.
3 minutes, Martin.
Okay. As we come back in time to the 10-year view, we see that the planned institutional projects move through the design process. As they do, Harvard will study the following elements in more detail as part of the Article 80 large project review. Some of the specific comments, again, came back to that wayfinding within the athletics campus and the orientation of the tennis, squash, and racket center and its relationship, as well as an understanding of what the public realm adjacent to some of those projects, how it should be configured. In the 10-year plan, as part of the design process, Harvard is committed to public realm improvements adjacent to the planned institutional projects on both North Harvard Street and Western Avenue. As we look a little bit more closely around an area that garnered a lot of attention, we updated the plan and thought about a few things to help the tennis, squash, and racket center more to fit better into its existing context, and also to maintain the relationships within and emerging in the athletics area. Number one really indicates why the building needs to be oriented the way it does. It has to do with the existing tennis court orientation that will be preserved, which is following NCAA regulations for the solar orientation of those. And then 2, 3, and 4 are areas of study under the Article 80B large project review that we know will take place when those projects do come along to ensure that the new buildings have a positive relationship with Soldiers Field Road, that the entries are aligned now more coherently along Harvard Way, and that they integrate with the existing campus buildings and axes, and that improved wayfinding will help everyone to move through this. So the very last slide sort of gives us a summary of those comments that were made from BCDC and how they were really incorporated into the plan. So for the siting of the racket center, as I just went through, how we reviewed those with the proposed siting and identified key features that we know will come up in Article 80B. We looked at those open spaces, updated the diagrams to express those along Western Avenue, looked at those pedestrian networks and wayfinding areas and the crossings into the future, and then really thought through the overall urban design patterns and thought of this as a system, particularly as we think both about athletics and the business school. So I appreciate your comments and a discussion to follow.
Thank you, Alexandra and Martin. Commissioners, the planning staff doesn't have any additional comments, and so we can dive right into our comments. And just as a reminder, Jonathan, Kathy, and I were at the last subcommittee, and so we can start with those comments first, and then any other commissioners, and there have been several of us who have attended the other subcommittee as well, are welcome to comment at that point. So feel free to raise your Zoom hand, and I would be happy to call on you. Martin, if we could also pull up maybe one of the illustrative site plans, that would be great. Perfect, thank you. Jonathan, thanks.
Yeah, I can get us going, and I was obviously only at the most recent subcommittee meeting. I think the kind of overall framework diagrams make a lot of sense. I'm probably a little was hoping to see a more meaningful response to commissioners' comments regarding the orientation of the tennis and squash center. I mean, I acknowledge the concern around compliance with regulations for the courts, but again, I think you have a pretty strong diagram of the actual roads, and the actual building doesn't actually respond to that. I guess I respect the idea that you'll kind of kick the can and talk about that in Article 80 large project, but again, that does seem to be the one moment where it feels like you have this diagram and it's not really adhering to it. You know, looking at like the Gateway building, it's clearly the form of the building responds to the urban context and your sort of diagrams of how it's working. And again, that's a spot that we talked about a lot as being a moment where it didn't really feel like it was coming together well. I realize there's a lot of pressure on that spot, but again, I was hoping to see more and how that made its way into these kind of framework diagrams. But I suppose, again, it sounds like that's something that we will just review when it becomes an actual Article 80B large project application.
Thanks, Jonathan. Kathy, any comments?
No, that was the one, what Jonathan just underscored was the one that really stood out in our last meeting as being a real conundrum. And sounds like the parameters within which one needs to work is really the reason why this hasn't modified much since our last meeting.
I mean, has there been any modification since the subcommittee meeting?
There has been, as a matter of fact. And so let's see where we're going to go to. One of the aspects we'll say is really sort of a recognition of the building entries, which are currently located along Harvard Way, and really thinking of that as the, quote unquote, front door to the athletics area. So as you're moving, from the Cambridge campus, which many students do, student athletes are coming across the river or even coming from various corners, the preferred entry point into this, as most of us know, is really through Harvard Way, which is, again, that extension, from the business school in between Blodgett and the Murr Center there. So the idea of trying to create a compound or an area which organizes those entries is indicated by those orange areas. Yeah. And we've also gone back and taken a look at the landscape, which is indicated at number 4 and number 3. It was a very poor condition today. It's a traffic circle and sort of overwhelmed by cars and just circulation. And we thought by clarifying Harvard Way access, as well as clarifying the axial relationship to the Charles River, that we would make a more welcoming front door for the tennis and squash racket center here. So those are some subtle changes that did happen to the landscape to acknowledge its new front door, which is really facing back towards the river itself.
Got it. Yeah, and I'm just pulling up your old presentation on the screen, and I see that. That's a great point. Thank you.
I would also add that the current footprint that we're showing was based on some very specific geometries and capacities for the courts themselves. And so we wanted to be very careful about not changing the footprint that wouldn't accommodate the program. So we did add this, ensuring that when we really are in design, we will be looking at those things carefully. but didn't want to get ahead of that process.
Got it. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Other commissioner comments?
This is Commissioner Sykes. Could you bring up the green, the diagram with the green lines? Yeah, this one, fine. So, Linda, I'm going to apologize in advance because I haven't attended any of the subcommittee meetings, but I just had a few questions about the hierarchy of the dominant green lines, and in particular, the one going over the footbridge versus the one going over the vehicular and footbridge. And they're sort of weighted equally, and I understand this is a diagram, but the question is about flow, you know, in terms of proportional allocation of both people and obviously in one case, people and cars. But is that within the purview of the IMP? And Linda, I'm happy to defer if it's not, but it kind of goes to the movement across perpendicular to those two lines and how you're thinking about it in my mind. So I guess if all questions are fair, I will ask you how proportionally pedestrians are allocated on these two green lines that are parallel to one another, and then how they are diffused into the business school campus, you know, from either direction and into the ERC and Western Ave.
Martin, do you want to take that question on?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. That's actually a really, very perceptive question. And I think what's interesting is that this diagram predates this planning effort. And it was something which was originally called the ladder diagram, which is really interesting. And it was a way of thinking about the movement patterns from the Cambridge campus, across the river into both HBS and then along North Harvard Street. And so while they're represented equally, you're absolutely right that the journey through Kresge and Weeks Footbridge within the business school is less occupied than I think a lot of the students who are coming actually right across the Anderson Bridge and moving along North Harvard Street. So they do have different emphases here, and one pedestrian mostly, the other vehicular and pedestrian on North Harvard Street. So those are very different sort of aspects. There is the merging sort of movement path, which is immediately adjacent to Soldiers Field Road, which you can see in the very first arc, which is adjacent to the Troubled River. And as they move internal to the campus, I think it becomes, less and less public in a way because of the use by many, many people. It's mostly students by the time you get into the campus itself. But the idea really with merging ERC is to begin to think about enhancing the movement through the campus as it moves towards Western Avenue and what we all know and see as the treehouse, which is right at the intersection of Kresge and Western Avenue to the south of the plan there. But those should be weighted not so equal, but it's sort of a remnant of this ladder diagram, again, for thinking about pedestrian movement from Cambridge to Alston.
So I guess my comment is, and thank you for the explanation. At some point, it would be great in the IMP to understand the proportionality of those two paths. And then, assuming what you just said is correct, the vehicular and pedestrian path then takes on a more significant presence in linking Boston to Cambridge, and the nodes take on a more significant role in the IMP, in my mind. But that's my comment, I guess, to both staff and to you as to how to apply the proportionality in the way you weight your focus in the IMP. So let me stop there and let others talk.
That's great.
Thank you, Kirk. And I know that the ladder diagram was something that we looked a lot at during the ERC review, and just how the ERC was connecting back to HBS and how that was then connecting back onto the Cambridge campus. Shauna.
Thanks very much Linda, and thanks very much, Martin and Alexandra, for the presentation. I was on the first subcommittee, not on the second, and I definitely appreciate the organization along Harvard Way of the entries and the front doors. But that actually brings me back to one of my initial concerns from a couple of subcommittees, is really the back doors feel very much backdoor. And by that I'm referring to the extremely long facade along Soldiers Road, which, even though it's primarily vehicular of the campus, not of the buildings, even though it's vehicular, it's a significant experience of many driving around or being along the Charles, biking, running. And I think, well, I understand that the buildings will be coming back for Article 80. I think an approach to what that edge is really more of a IMP master plan strategy. And maybe you have addressed it in the subcommittee prior to this, but that remains a concern of mine. It does feel, I'm not understanding it to be the same as a typical campus. It's not at all like the business school campus. I'm not talking about more porosity than what you're describing already, but really an approach of sort of care and intentionality that doesn't feel like it's, the scrappy backyard. And if you feel very excluded. And again, I'm not talking about opening it physically, but is there a way to make it feel more intentional and civic?
Yeah, it's a great comment, Shauna.
Okay. You want us to respond to that? That's a excellent comment. Sandra, you want to any?
No, I think we take that comment very, very sincerely, and we haven't, I don't think we have not made any specific plans, but we do, take good care to maintain and be a good steward of the campus overall, and that includes all areas of the campus. So I think this is something that we would, take back to our athletics campus and take a good look at how we can consider that area and consider those points. It isn't something that we have addressed specifically in the IMP through any, particular interventions, but I think part of our overall stewardship of the campus is that, is ensuring that it's all being well maintained.
Okay, I mean, and this is just something to take forward with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Shauna. I don't see any other commissioner hands up. I'll just add a few things and then Will can take some public comment. I share a lot of the commissioners' concerns about, I think, what are called building 4 and 5, which is different from items 4 on this slide, and understand that there are orientation challenges with tennis, although there's a little bit more flexibility, to actually go the other direction of north. And so I think those are the pieces that we would like to suggest that you continue working with planning staff on. I think Shauna's comment about really the area between Soldiers Field Road and the facades for the Dixon Center and Field House, et cetera, is a really important one. I think we've all experienced that kind of front yard that feels like leftover space. And I think there are a lot of significant kind of service needs to those buildings. And so we understand the complexity of making that both of kind of visually successful as well as operationally successful. But I think that would be something else I'd like to see you continue to work with planning staff on. And then one thing we didn't touch on today, but that has come up in both of the subcommittees, is just a renewed interest in having a pedestrian crossing along Soldiers Field Road, kind of to the west here of this diagram. And I know there are ongoing conversations that you've talked about with DCR, and so I just love for that suggestion to be part of the record here. Christina, do we have any public comment?
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. I'm just scrolling up and down the list of attendees here, and I see no hands raised. So commissioners, at this time, will consider the comment period closed.
Thank you, Christina. All right, commissioners, we are now at the point where we need to make a recommendation, and the recommendation can, as you all know, have some caveats. And so would anyone like to make a first pass at that recommendation?
Motion to approve, obviously pending further coordination with articulated large projects for individual developments there.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Anyone else want to add anything to that or to second it?
I would like to add to continue looking at the edge of Soldiers Road, not just against the new buildings, but the whole frontage of Soldiers Road.
Thanks, Shauna. Any other items that anyone would like to add? And then I can have Christina read back that motion to us. All right, Christina, I think we have a compound motion. And you're on mute. There you go.
I was going to say the standard language is to recommend that the BPDA board approve the proposed project upon successful completion of the Article 80 review process. In this case, subject additionally to further design review attention given to the edges along Soldiers Field Road, and then further resolution of issues that are subject to Article 80 large project review.
Thank you, Christina. Do we have a second?
Yeah.
Second. All right. All in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans.
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith.
Aye.
McYoung Kim.
Aye.
Kathy Kotaritis.
Aye.
I think that David Manfredi has joined us.
Yes, and aye.
Thank you. And Kirk Sykes.
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley, aye. You are approved. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Great to work with your team. All right, we are now going to shift to the 3 new projects that are before us tonight. And Christina, if you could invite Commissioners Lubenow, Ron, and Solano back for the presentation. I think we had quorum for this last vote.
Well, I am inviting commissioners back. I think we can flip this over to Ted, who will be giving us some planning context, and then I believe Seth, and then to the proponent.
Great, and I think we're going to do it a little bit differently in terms of the order, if that works for you, Christina. So 434 Jamaicaway Street. This is our first presentation. This is also an affordable housing project. Commissioners, we don't have any commissioners recused from this project. Ted's going to kick us off with the overview, and then we'll have the proponent present, and then have urban design staff wrap us up.
And Commissioner Eastley, I'm actually going to take the first slide and hand it then over to Ted. This is Seth Reisman of the Planning Department. The project is essentially what is expected to be phase 1 of a proposed 2-phase redevelopment of a 3.3 acre site. And phase 1 has been submitted to the Planning Department for review. It should be noted that phase 2 has not been submitted for review and is not under consideration before the commission at this time. Phase 1, which is filed, proposes the demolition of a small residential structure, which is not a part of the existing Rogerson facility, and the development of approximately 158,000 square feet of affordable units, including 66 memory care units and 67 affordable senior housing units. Phase 2, not yet filed, contemplates the demolition of some or all of the existing facility, the development of additional affordable housing, the creation of open space between the two phases, and no building closer to the Jamaicaway than it is today. And phase 2 is presented here as reference, as we ask the proponent to show some possible scenarios of future thinking so that we could evaluate phase 1 in light of potential future scenarios. Ted.
Thanks, Seth. Next slide, please. I'll cover a little bit about the zoning before then handing it back to Seth. So this site is located in the Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Zoning District in a multifamily residential sub-district, and I'll talk a little bit about the dimensions for that sub-district on the next slide. But first, while the map is at this neighborhood scale, I wanted to cover the two overlays for reference. The first is the Greenbelt Protection Overlay District, which is very relevant to the front setback of this building. That's the light green stripe that traces the Jamaicaway on this map. And the Jamaicaway Greenbelt Overlay is one of 12 Greenbelt roadways and their adjacent areas that are delineated on the Jamaica Plain Neighborhood District zoning map. And for everyone's reference, in the zoning code, it's stated that the purpose of this overlay is to, quote, enhance and protect the natural scenic resources of the city, preserve and enhance air quality, and protect vegetation and open space along these greenbelt roadways. So essentially that's the front yard area in the setback off of the Jamaicaway that this zoning picks out. And then the whole site is in the neighborhood design overlay district, and these are established to, quote, protect the historic character and scale and quality of the pedestrian environment in areas of Jamaica Plain with a concentration of historic buildings. Next slide, please. And now, as we look at the site, just jumping back to what the zoning dimensional limits are for multifamily residential. In the zoning code, the maximum height is 35 feet and 3 stories. Maximum FAR is 1. Front yard setback is 15 feet. Side yard is 10 feet and rear yard is 20 feet. And moving on, I'll hand it back to Seth to discuss the physical context.
And please go back to one slide. You'll see in this image that the site is bordered to the north and the south by 1 and 2 family residential districts, and to the east by and south to the multifamily residential districts and buildings. The 1 and 2 family units are predominantly 2 to 2.5 stories, and the multifamily buildings range between 3 stories that you see on the south side of Beaufort Street there, and 8 stories with what's labeled as the Forbes building. And you may remember, commissioners, that last year you approved the Forbes building as a renovation of an existing affordable housing project. Just to the right of the Forbes building, I believe, is Center Street to help locate you. And with that, we would like to invite the proponent to present.
Thank you, Seth. And Ted, it's so great to have you on board. Look forward to having you as part of our team here. So we have the Rogerson, Schaefer, and Warner Larson team that will be presenting this project, and then we'll have a few overview slides from urban design staff.
Great. Good evening, and thank you to the co-chairs. Thank you to the commissioners. We're grateful and excited for the opportunity to present this project tonight. My name is Emily Regan with the Rogerson Communities team. Before I hand off to our architects at Schaefer, I'll give a very brief overview of the project. Rogerson Communities is a nonprofit organization. They've been providing forward-thinking housing and care for seniors since their founding in 1860. They were the early founders of supportive housing services for seniors. Today, Rogerson has grown to serve over 2,000 families across 30 facilities in Massachusetts. And this project is part of the organization's strategy for growth for the next generation of care for seniors. The ultimate goal of this development is to care for as many seniors as possible, advance Rogerson's mission, and create the resources necessary to continue their tradition of excellence in senior care into the future. The property is an important piece of Rogerson's portfolio. Rogerson owns the land, which is not true of most of the other sites where they operate. We will be replacing the existing memory care programming while also adding much needed affordable housing and maintaining open space and other amenities for all. And the design prioritizes state-of-the-art, healthy, and highly sustainable living and care options for seniors. Next slide. The development program for this site has two components. We will be replacing the existing 66 memory care beds and the 24 openings for social day programming. Above the memory care floors, we will add 67 new one-bedroom apartments for seniors at or below 60% AMI. The project includes an underground parking garage as well as maintained surface parking to keep all visitors and staff on site. And as Seth mentioned, phase 2 is not part of the proposal submitted. It's a future project that will need to be reviewed and approved through a separate Article 80 process. Finally, there are a few constraints that drove the design. Rogerson House is currently home to 66 individuals receiving memory care and provides daycare for up to 24 people each weekday. These residents and their families rely on Rogerson and cannot be displaced during construction. As you can see, this leaves just 1/3 of the total site available. The only point of access to the site is from Beaufort Road, and the memory care facility requires secured outdoor space. So with that, I will turn it over to Philippe to walk through the design.
Thank you, Emily. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. A quick overview. I think we talked about the site, but this is good to notice that the site highlighted in red is in an area of the city that is rich in amenities and transportation. It is a few minutes walk to the Greenway, and in fact, Beaufort Road is one of the shortest dimensions between Center Street and the Greenway, and could present an opportunity for better connection between Center Street and the Greenway. Many of us who have not visited Rogerson House probably know Rogerson House through this facade along the Greenway. However, the site is deep and it hides a fairly low 2-story but large footprint building, as has been brought up previously. These are images of Beaufort Road, which is the only access to the site. Currently, part of the site is that parking lot on the right-hand side. That it constitutes the larger overall site that we are talking about today. Again, to point that there are some larger and denser developments that are surrounding the site currently. This is a slide just to show why we are doing a replacement building. The current building of the client, Rogerson, is built more than 30 years ago, and it does not allow for an easy renovation and expansion to follow their mission. It is spaces are compromised, the bedrooms are semi-private, the ceilings are low, and as Emily said, it's a fully occupied community that makes intensive renovations very challenging for this specific population who have memory impairments. So the project will take place overall in few phases. The image on the left-hand side is the current existing site with a large courtyard, which is essential to the running of a memory care facility in the city. Phase 1 will happen in this large footprint on the image on the top right. Then comes in the demolition phase, which will potentially remove the existing buildings from the site before phase 2 comes back and completes the whole image or the whole plan for the site, putting back a large courtyard that is essential again for the running of such program. This building is fairly unusual, stacking affordable housing and memory care together, but that is essential to the client's mission to create this inclusive community that brings together people of different abilities and incomes. So the first 3 floors will occupy the memory care units, and the upper 4 floors will be 1-bedrooms of independent living for seniors, all affordable. Those of us who have visited memory care facilities, security and also a continuous loop of circulation within the facility is an important element of caring for those individuals throughout the day. An overview of how the massing came to become of the new building, which is phase 1. A building that started with an L shape that engages the street, has a view towards the pond, then some adjustments to the massing to allow for natural light to come in through the first 3 floors of the memory care, allowing for terraces and secure outdoor spaces for all 3 floors, 1, 2, and 3. And then how the massing of that building got, again, massaged to reflect the townhouses or the 3-story brick buildings across from us and create a datum for Beaufort Road. And overall, with how the vision for the site will be complete later on with the phase 2, creating a cohesive campus, putting back the outdoor spaces that are essential to the community and to the use of memory care. This is in a precedent images and feels of what could be this outdoor space and landscapes throughout the site, places where residents and family member could partake into activities such as planting, small spaces for recollection, but also plantings that are of nostalgia and remembrance for those who are losing their memory on a daily basis. Walking path, walking loop, all in this secure environment that really includes everybody. In overall site plan, as the project with phase 2, when will the whole site will be complete, I would like to bring attention to the commission about the enhancements along Beaufort Road, the widening of the sidewalk, the street furniture, the trees, the trees along the street, but also at the same time a drop off that is off Beaufort Road for the vehicles and the pickup and additional parking to maintain staff and visitors off Beaufort Road. There are 2 large green spaces that will end up on site. The courtyard that is between both buildings, but also a full renovation of the lawn in front along the greenway, with possibly play structures, accessible pathways, and enhanced connections between Center Street and Jamaicaway. In terms of a first floor, we have worked with the owner to make sure that that first floor is really engaging with the street, putting forward public-facing amenities such as the social day program, a multipurpose room, the lounge, and the entrance for the entire building, so that no matter who you are and who you're coming to visit, you come in through one front door, again, reinforcing the inclusive nature of that development.
2 minutes, Philippe.
All right. And as you go forward, these are the floor plans, and then the residential floor plans of the top 3 floors. The below grade garage, and a quick view of the facades as they relate to the Forbes building from a height perspective, but also from a rhythm and penetration. And the elevation that is a cross elevation shows that 3-story datum that not only diverts the wind, but also reflects the buildings across the street from the building. The 3-dimensional perspective as a conceptual image of how this building will sit on the site, again, showing a multiplicity of materials that are contextual and residential. And then highlighting here how the building is intended to be built in mass timber and a panelized exterior wall system to not only to create this wellness and atmosphere inside the building, minimize the carbon footprint of this development, but also to speed up the construction and minimize noise and dirt on the immediate context. I think that's our last slide, a view from Beaufort Road looking towards the Greenway for the project. As a conclusion, this project is really unique and it's really going to create an urban and connecting campus for older adults. It presents an opportunity for integrated housing and aging care, as well as intergenerational interactions for the neighborhood and the residents on site. It's also wellness focused through its structure, its outdoor spaces, and its thermal comfort and well-being for the residents who will live in it and visit the place. With that, I turn it back to the commission.
Thank you. And I think we just have a couple slides from staff. Lizzie.
All right, so I'll unshare and then you guys can share.
Thank you. So relatively quickly, phase 1 is designed and sited to not impact existing operations. And though existing mature trees will be removed for the phase 1 project, the commitment in phase 2 to retain the front yard and setback from the Jamaicaway and its mature trees is critical to the planning department. The phase one building establishes a street wall along Beaufort Road. But the massing, we really want the proponent to look at the massing, the materiality, planting at the base of the building, street trees and streetscape design and furnishings, which need to be further developed to integrate this additional density into the existing fabric. We also want to make sure we understand what portion of the site will be executed with phase one, and really asking whether the visitor parking or some of the visitor parking can be reduced in phase one to increase permanent open space on the site. Next slide, please. In respect to the massing, we're really looking and asking whether the proposed 3-story podium along Beaufort and associated step back above are successful in defining a street wall and creating a successful overall massing composition. And we'd look forward to working with the proponent on considering the overall composition with the context, specifically its relationship to the Forbes building and the buildings across the street and future phase two. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, Seth.
And if the proponent could reshare their presentation.
Yes, if you could put up maybe a site plan showing phase one and the relationship to phase two, that would be really helpful. And before Kirk and Jonathan jump in here with comments, I just wanted to add that Emily and Philippe, what we'll be sharing now in terms of our comments are not things that you need to respond to today, but things that we'd like to see as we continue to work with your team in the future. So with that, Kirk.
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. I'm very familiar with the site, as I live about 4 blocks away. And my father was cared for by Rogerson. So I'm familiar with the program and some of the constraints you deal with memory care as well. So the comments, I think, let me start with saying this is an iconic site. It has such importance on this side of the Jamaicaway. And while we have an abundance of green space on the other side, it's not lost on how important your front lawn onto the Jamaicaway is. And to some degrees, the facade that's there today. And I'm not we don't need to address it today, but at some point, understanding what phase two might look like and how it may either respect the facade, replace the facade, or do something different, which it appears to be doing, would be good to understand. So going to the building you're proposing today, a couple of comments. The buildings on the left of Beaufort Road are also iconic. They're quite unique in the bayfront continuity of materiality and consistency, and they're quiet. You know, they kind of go away in as much as a 4-story brick building go away in a neighborhood of 2.5-story wood frame buildings. I'm not sure yet that that's where your building is in terms of quiet and going away, and I'd love to see how you might explore not bifurcating facade into 2 different materialities, chromas, etc., as it appears you may be doing on Beaufort Road. So that's one. I think understanding better the treatment on Beaufort Road and how there may be some continuity to that iconic front lawn on the Jamaicaway for residents would be great to understand a little better in the landscape strategy, because I think that's part of your give back in addition to your relief at the street edge. And then maybe a little better understanding of your stepping treatment perpendicular to Beaufort that allows the light into the building, but also presents a lower massing to the closer residential buildings that are lower themselves. So those are my immediate comments. I think it can be a great project and look forward to the evolution of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk. Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. I want to echo what Kirk said, and I think this is a really exciting project and appreciate the investment here. And I think I'm really taken by the sort of the diagram and your explanation of the idea of circular loops and memory and how that becomes kind of a driver of the formal response. So I appreciate that. I like how they sort of light into the corridors, things like that. I think that's making a lot of sense and a lot of thought and care there. I am concerned a little bit about the light in the courtyards. Just kind of curious how all those will function. and just relative to solar orientation. So, you know, in subcommittee, understanding more how that courtyard within phase one, as well as the new courtyard Jamaica between phase one and two, are going to actually feel given the massing of these buildings. Again, I appreciate the intentionality with the massing, but again, to what extent is that responding to creating a nice sort of pleasant courtyard? And just kind of coming back to that point about the loops. I mean, I wonder to what extent is there a loop that connects phase one and phase two, and then how does that circulation need to perhaps be privileged or privatized from public circulation as a whole? So just understanding how movement works throughout the whole site will be something to consider. But again, I appreciate the thoughtfulness of this. I guess I'd agree with Kirk that I want to understand a little bit more the logic behind how the materials are applied on the facade. I sort of understood the evolution of your massing, and then it was just sort of like, bam, here's the rendering. And I guess I want to understand kind of what the rules of the game are, why materials are used a certain way. So that would be something to explore in subcommittee. And again, agreeing with Kirk on the sort of comment about the context, I don't necessarily see the Forbes building in and of itself as like the only contextual driver to sort of derive a facade logic from. So I think, yes, that's a similar height building and scale, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to you should lock into that in terms of your expression. So a lot of exciting things in the project, and yeah, exciting to see how we can better understand and kind of work through some of the facade design in subcommittee.
Thanks, Jonathan. David?
I think that Kirk's intimate familiarity with this site in many ways gives him great perspective here, and I appreciate that. He said everything that I'm going to say better because of his familiarity and insight here. Two things. I won't repeat everything because I thought he said it so well. I think there's a lot of good thinking here. I understand the constraints of the new construction to the existing building and how it has to fit so that it can remain operational. But I do share the same concerns Jonathan has about that, about the courtyard and how it will really feel. And I think Jonathan said something very, very interesting, which is how will it connect to the future? I'm not sure that has what that can be, but it could be many different things, almost cloister-like, that could be very exciting. I don't understand the kind of horizontal bifurcation of the massing. I understood it maybe in narrative, and then in the renderings, it seemed quite foreign, and maybe just trying too hard and becoming a little bit arbitrary. And then lastly, I know we're not here to talk about phase two, and there is no proposal for phase two, but it would seem really a shame to lose the Rogerson building, house, home, as some part of this long-term composition. And I don't know this is the time to address that, but boy, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your long-term thinking on that subject. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anne Marie?
Thank you for the presentation. My comments have to do a little bit with just thinking about this holistically as a campus plan, that as you plan for the future, both with this immediate proposal and phase two, how do people, Commissioner Evans referred to sort of movement on the campus, but how do you define the entry, whether it's vehicular or pedestrian? How do the changes you're making help to both create a sense of campus, but also relate to the surrounding communities? I'd like to understand that a little bit better, including how you might think about the surface parking. And it's not clear to me, how surface parking and structured parking work. As part of that, I am concerned about how the proposed design fits within the neighborhood. This is a community with a neighborhood design overlay that very much stresses the importance of the historic character of the neighborhood. So when you come to design subcommittee, I'd really like to see some analysis of that, not just in terms of building heights and materials, but one thing I don't think we talk a lot about in this commission is also kind of rhythm, proportion, how do the openings in the new design relate to openings in the neighborhood? So I'd like to understand your analysis of that, first of all, broadly, within the neighborhood in general, and then specifically in respect to the adjoining, the site is so, it makes for an interesting design problem because it has, it mediates different contexts. And then finally, I think, Beaufort, I'd really like to think about, how that becomes a public realm, that right now it's not clear to me, how this project contributes to that, impacts that, and would like to see some drawings and analysis that better articulate that, because I do share Commissioner Sykes' concerns about, how you relate to the Beaufront buildings on the other side. So a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Shauna?
We go back to the plan for a second. I think it's a very exciting project. From a landscape perspective, what I'm really, and I think there are some interesting images about the landscape. Okay, so this is helpful. So I would just like to understand these spaces more when we come to it, the sort of section, if there's any grade changes, grading implications. One thing I'm a little bit worried about, it's a little bit clearer than in the other plan here, is it seems like a lot of the vehicle edges are coming right up to the street. It's more, there's more space on this plan than the other, but understanding how those edges, as we're buffering the adjacent property, the Forbes property, and as well, just understanding all the materiality. I think that this is a better plan to be looking at. I am concerned about pushing into the property, extending the parking lot into the park area at the front. And so along with my other colleagues, I would like to see if there could be a reduction in the parking so that we're not losing that extra chunk, which is kind of about where the area of the roundabout is. And so that's really what I'd like to focus on more, is materiality, understanding the security and where that secure boundary is. I think it's probably been thought about, but it's hard for me to tell here. And then of course a concept of what the phasing is doing.
Thank you, Shauna. Kathy?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for a great presentation. I have a deep appreciation for what Rogerson does as an organization and institution, and I really appreciate what you're trying to create here. There are a lot of things that my colleagues have talked about already here, but I think there's one thing I guess I'd like to make clear, and perhaps somebody from the planning department can clarify this. We are focused on phase 1 at the moment for review. Phase 2 is coming along. Will we someday, when that hopefully happens, see this again, or will that be seen as a small project? Because I'd like to comment a little bit on the idea of removing the existing building and maybe alternatives there, but I guess I want to just understand what we will see again in the future.
Seth, can you address that?
Sure. And Kathy, unfortunately, I don't have a solid answer for you. I think it's, as phase 2 has not been fully described yet, we do not know its permitting pathway. So we're sort of straddling a fine line here where, I think it's appropriate to receive comments on what the future of this campus could be like, to help guide that future effort. though we're not technically, reviewing that.
Got you. Got you. Well, I'll just leave it at that. I think it would be a shame to lose the existing brick building facing the Jamaicaway. I think it's a presence that is almost iconic now for the community. And so while I appreciate the remaining of open space along the Jamaicaway, I think that that should be looked at in the future, and perhaps alternative scenarios brought forward that maintain that building and adapt it perhaps, and consider extensions or an expansion of it in other ways. So I'll leave that at that. But the proposal that we are really focused on, I would like to see more in committee on the elevations from almost every direction out from where the public would be passing, and from a little bit of a distance too. I understand that behind the Forbes building, one might not see the height of this, but I really wonder about not just Beaufort Street, but the backyards and the next road to the north, northeast. And I think that that is where the distinction of the height will be much more noticeable in the proximity to the boundary, the property boundary. I generally, in looking at this, feel that there's quite a bit of height along Beaufort that needs to be managed, and your initial presentation might be a little overwhelming to that portion of the street, and especially the residences and the buildings across the way. You're not that far from some two-family and single-family houses going further and deeper into Beaufort. I'm also really, I'd like to understand, I'm seeing some hint of shadowing here and what you are looking at with this building, but what are the implications for this, for particularly Beaufort, but the surrounding area, and what might the height of the building that you are proposing and the spread of this building mean to the surrounding areas? And I'd like to understand a little bit more about the public. What is public here when we're talking about the open space? There's certainly the perception of open space when anybody's passing along the Jamaicaway. I don't recognize the front yard on the Jamaicaway as being a very active public space. But is any of this that we're seeing restricted from the public for obvious reasons? And what is available to the public in exchange for this shift in density with the one that the project and the building you're proposing, but also the prospective residential structure? I think it would be helpful to understand where the public benefit is as opposed to the management of the public public realm outside the bounds of the property. So yes, I would like to understand better the impacts of this new height and new density on the adjacencies, and also on the perception of this campus by the surrounding population in the neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you.
Linda, oh, Laura, go ahead. My raise hand function doesn't work, so if you can.
Okay, thank you,
Laura.
Thank you, Mick
Laura
Young.
goes first.
So we'll do Laura and then Mick Young, and we'll try to keep the comments a little bit compact, and then jump right into the public comment if we could.
So I agree with so much of what my colleagues have talked about. One thing I'm not clear about is how the parking works. Could you go in what phase it's introduced in? So maybe going back to the phasing diagrams. There you go. So that is essentially in the earliest of phases. Okay. If you could go back to the site plan, please. There have been so many important comments, so I'm not going to repeat any of them, but I keep staring at the entrance and the way that that parking area connects to Beaufort, as well as the street that is perpendicular to that. And I'd like to understand more about how that entryway works and how the circulation works. It's just really taking up a lot of space, and I don't, I'd love to know whether or not, like, do emergency vehicles have to go there? What's the circulation that needs to happen right there at the front door, which feels pretty squeezed to me. The other is, we didn't talk about servicing. I'd love to understand that. And then the last thing I'll say is, I think this project is a lot about context. And I'd like to understand much more clearly what's going on every single edge of this, including, maybe sections that show distances and relationships. And I'll just double underline something that Shauna said, which is to look at the topography so that we can understand exactly what's going on, what are the relationships, and what are either the opportunities or the limitations of it. But otherwise, I think the rest of the comments have done a great job of capturing a lot of my questions.
Thank you, Laura. McYoung?
Thanks. I find this project really exciting. I think the only thing that I want to add to all the great comments is, Philippe, I think it would be very helpful if you started off with the guiding principles that drive the project. You have a very unique population here. It's a population that's defined by kind of, it's like a degeneration of cognitive function, right? It's a campus that has a very unique set of needs. And at least for myself, I'd like to have a better understanding of like how all of the standard design guidelines that we use, particularly wayfinding and orientation, all that stuff from inside to outside, how that this population, what their needs are, and how that can shape this design so that it could be quite unique, right? For this, I remember there are some very particular things about storytelling to know the orientation, and I vaguely remember something about like not strong contrast between light and shade. There's all these things that I think would be really helpful. I think my fellow commissioners have brought some of these up as general design considerations and probably with knowledge of this, but I think it'd be great if you just started off with, this is a very unique population, their needs are very unique, and here's how it's shaped this design. So that's my only recommendation.
Thank you. All those elements are embedded in here, but we'll bring them up. We'll explain them better next time. Thank you.
Thank you, McYoung. Christina, I think we're ready to go to public comment.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. John, I see your hand is raised and we've promoted you. Are you able to unmute yourself? John, is it Couples? Are you able to? Hi, go ahead.
My name is John Couples. I'm a resident of Jamaica Plain. I've lived here since 1970. I've been involved in housing issues since 1973 when I founded, one of the founders of Urban Edge. I've been affiliated with Rogerson Communities since 1980. I was involved in the first iteration of this campus. We're in the midst of a housing crisis for elders, and this this speaks to that, as well as continuing our program of memory care for people with cognitive decline. Jamaica Plain is one of the epicenters of the housing crisis for elders, and particularly for low-income elders. So this is part and parcel of Rogerson's mission of providing housing and care. So it's critical to the whole housing crisis that we're facing that is across the nation and certainly in Massachusetts. This site has been in Rogerson's purview since the 1950s, when the original building was built that's visible now from the Jamaicaway. So this is a critical portion of our mission. I think that concludes my report.
Thank you, John. Jen Carty, we're going to promote you to co-host. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the Commission for your taking of this public comments. As I understand it, the Commission reviews the aesthetics of proposed projects and ensures that they have a positive impact on the public realm. And I just wanted to focus on why I think under that rubric, this project should have your full support as it works through this process and works with you on those design elements. First of all, Rogerson is a well-known provider in our community, and some people on this call have already spoken to it, but they have a demonstrated history of the capacity to run a campus like this and to pull off a multi-phase construction project like this. So some of the concerns that we have with newer entries into the field don't seem to be at issue in this case. It seems to be a thoughtful design situated in an area rich with amenities, especially the pondside view and the park access, but also for the long-term affordable housing, whether they're enjoying day programs or not yet participating in the memory care element. The fact that it's walkable to the JP Center, South Main Street Small Business District and events is also an amenity and enrichment for their lives. There's been care to maintain the supportive housing for the existing memory care patients, but still creating a vision of an integrated community with people of different abilities living together. And then finally, echoing on what John said before me, we are experiencing a tremendous housing shortage, and these income restriction apartments will be a huge boon for the opportunity of our local elders to downsize who might not otherwise be able to on fixed incomes or with limited assets. My own mother-in-law being one of those people who is looking for this kind of facility, and there are very, very few. We're trying to find the right place for her, and there are very, very few beds of this kind available. So thank you for your time, and I hope to see this project move forward to fruition.
Thank you so much, Jen. Next, we have a number 617 ending in 162. Caller, are you able to unmute yourself? It's *6 on your dial pad. Looks like we may have lost a caller. Chris Vaughn, you're our next guest. Lizzie, if you could promote Chris to co-host.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Chris Vaughn. I am a Jamaica Plain resident, and I would also like to voice my full support for this project. I think John and Jen were far more articulate than I could ever be, but I think the mission of Rogerson House is just so important. I think a lot of thought and care has gone into this design. I'm very comfortable with the size and design as presented, and so I hope you would support this proposal moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Carolyn Royce. Give us 1 second while we promote you. Carolyn, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yep, there I am. Thanks very much. I really hope the project goes through. The Rogerson House has a very good reputation. I live in Jamaica Plain. I live near a Rogerson project in Eggleston Square that's it seems like it's managed very well. They've taken good care of the property. So I think the project is really important to have go through. But I really appreciate all the comments of the commission tonight, because I think all those design elements, considering all those design elements, really make a building more appealing. And I know it's important to get that right for the people that live around there. So I appreciate those comments, and I hope, I think the design will get better by taking a look at those. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next caller will be Jeffrey Campbell. Jeffrey, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Great. My name's Jeff Campbell. I'm a resident of Jamaica Plain. In fact, I live in one of the Beaufort brownstones across the street from the proposed building. I have to oppose this building. The commissioners have touched on many of the elements that are in question, namely the size, the building materials, the location, the proximity to other buildings. But I really would just like to talk, and since those have already been covered, I won't duplicate them. But I would just like to, ask you to consider the impact that this will have on our neighborhood. The size of this building is going to darken Beaufort Road. It'll be just an empty, dead corridor where you won't even be able to grow street trees. It'll darken Lockstead Road in the afternoon. They'll lose all their afternoon sunlight. This building is way too big for this neighborhood. You talked about the density. The neighborhood can't take this density. It's a one-way road. It's a one-lane road that's very narrow and can't support the traffic that it has now. And the increased density is going to really have a huge impact on the rest of the neighborhood. I've worked in healthcare for 42 years, and I completely understand the need for memory care, and I understand the need for affordable housing. But this building is outsized and would have a devastating effect on our classic Boston neighborhood. So I would just ask the commissioners to please consider the impact this building is going to have on the rest of the neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Megan Stokes, we've promoted you to co-host. Are you able to unmute yourself?
I am, thanks. I'm Megan. I live in the Pondside condo building as well. And I am thrilled that this building is getting made. The designs look beautiful. I agree that there is just such a shortage of housing, particularly for elder folks. And with all respect to the last speaker, there is barely any traffic on Beaufort. Can certainly handle a little bit more. And I think the weighing a little bit of darkness against housing for tons more people, I think people need housing. So I'm in full support as a direct neighbor of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Peter Marino, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi, yes, I am. My name is Peter Marino, and I live at 16 Beaufort Road, directly across the street from the proposed project. I would just want to echo some of the things that people have said already in terms of the design. I'm really focused on the height of this building. The zoning in this neighborhood's 35 feet. This building proposes to be 81 feet tall. Most everyone that lives on the end of Beaufort Road will have the sky blocked out from their view. I'm not talking about direct light, but actually be able to look out their window and see blue sky that will be blocked out by the building. Also, again, it is a one-way street. It's a small street. We do have a lot of traffic coming and going on the street, from Amazon delivery cars to ambulances for Rogerson. A lot of the residents would like to see a separate entrance for this project. I know it cuts through the Greenbelt zone, but it would be a big help to the residents that live on this street already. And I would just love for Rogerson to actually listen to the comments from the direct abutters on Lockstead and Beaufort Road, and Jamaicaway Court, who will be very impacted on this project and work with us to alter these plans and not be so enormous on the space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Bill, I see you're next. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi, my name is Bill Peros, and I've lived in the Pondside condominiums directly across the street from the proposed building. I've lived here for 29 years. I'm technically on Lakeville Road. Beaufort Road connects to Lakeville Road as a U shape back to Center Street. Both roads are one way around the block. I'm fundamentally in support of Rogerson's proposal. I think it's important. We do need the housing. I get it. They've been good neighbors with us. We're good neighbors to them. But it's interesting because the 7-story building that's principally right on the sidewalk on Beaufort Road would make a sight line that goes to the 2nd and 3rd floor back of our building that face our own courtyard. I had a drawing from figure 4-14 from the PNF that shows the direct sight line of the 7th floor will actually look into the back windows of the units that are on Lakeville Road. If you're unfamiliar with our building, it's a U-shaped building on Beaufort and Lakeville, and we have a small courtyard behind our building. So I'm on the 3rd floor, and people would look right into my windows. And I wouldn't see anything but a 7-story building outside the windows. So I really think that the height of this is of concern. Now, the argument has been that Forbes House is 8 stories, but it is set back significantly from Beaufort Road. So I think a redesign of the height of the building has to be considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. David, I believe you're next. David, are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Well, thank you for allowing our comments. I agree with what Anne Marie had made a comment earlier about the historic nature of this neighborhood. The Pondside area of Jamaica Plain is a very special place. The Emerald Necklace is a very special place. And this project, in its scale and even its character, it really is out of character with the historic nature of the Pondside district. And this is a massive building. And at the end of the day, it's a big box. And it would look fine in Kendall Square, but in this historic district, it's going to be a permanent blight, not only for the neighbors on Beaufort and Lockstead, but for everybody who's walking along the Jamaicaway and the pond. 100 years from now, they're going to be looking at these giant boxes, completely out of character with the historic nature of this very special part of the city. All you have to do is walk 3 or 4 blocks either direction, and you will see the thoughtful, detailed, historic architecture. This completely does not fit. Kathy, you mentioned you used the word overwhelming. That is exactly how the abutters of Beaufort Road feel. This is going to be overwhelming to the people who have called this home for decades. It's a 7-story building, 57 feet away from the abutters who have lived here for a long time. Mick Young, you mentioned the design for light and how you were impressed with how they designed the building to meet the needs of the seniors. Light's very important. What about the light of the Beaufort Road residents? There was no analysis of light. There was no analysis of the sky dome obstruction, which is required by Article 80, and this wasn't been done. Lastly, very quickly, the process has been flawed. You're going to hear again and again from the Rogerson team that they're engaging the neighbors. From our perspective, they have not been listening to our concerns. This has not been an engaging process. And for a project this massive, you need to listen to the reasonable concerns of the abutters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. Commissioners, at this time, we see no additional hands raised, so we're going to close the public testimony period, and I'll turn it back to you, Commissioner Easley.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you. We had, about a 10 or so really helpful comments from the community, so we appreciate your voice. Commissioners, we've now seen the presentation. Grateful for your comments as well, and now need to make a motion. Would anyone like to make a motion to send a subcommittee?
Yeah, motion to send a subcommittee.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith?
Aye.
McYoung Kim?
Aye.
Kathy Kotaritis?
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow?
Aye.
David Manfredi?
Aye.
Bill Ron? Bill, do we have you back with us? Lara Solano?
Aye.
Kirk Sykes?
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley.
Linda, I'm back.
Oh, there you are, Bill. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for the presentation today, and we look forward to working together in subcommittee.
Thank you.
Commissioners, next is 151 Cambridge Street, which is also the West End Library site. This also is the first presentation to BCDC. It's both an affordable housing project and on public land, and Commissioner Evans is recused from this project. Jonathan, will have you come back for the last one. And I think we're ready for planning staff overview. Ted, are you presenting that part?
Yes, I'll be kicking off this one. Thank you very much. So just a quick overview of the proposal. This is the result of an RFP that was issued by the city as part of its Housing with Public Assets program to look for opportunities to develop income restricted housing over public facilities. This is the site of a one-story public library branch, the West End branch, and the proposal seeks to develop a new 19,000 square foot library with 119 units of housing in the building that will comprise 14 stories. Next slide, please. Now, the zoning map, the BCDC, of course, doesn't grant zoning relief. That's the Board of Appeal, but this zoning map is a little bit of a mix of different abutting contexts, and I'll explain that a little bit more in the next slide as well. But just to note, this is in the Cambridge Street North Protection Area, and there are a few other regulatory layers, which is a land disposition agreement with the city because this is a West End urban renewal site. The tree ordinance also applies because of some trees on site. And then on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the historic context. If you could advance. On this slide, you can see in the image on the left a tableau that brings together a few different planning contexts that demonstrate how hard it is to write zoning that covers what you'd really want to see in this built environment. At the bottom of the image is the 4- and 5-story Beacon Hill brick tenement typology that used to historically extend across to the north side of Cambridge Street before, of course, the Boston Redevelopment Authority gave us what we see in this image. On the left side is Charles River Plaza. That is a 650,000 square foot facility that has Mass General medical offices and research facilities, as well as retail. The library is the hexagonal building in the middle that is 1 story, and then to the right is the Otis House, which is the last vestigial piece of Bowdoin Square, which is a context that predates this all, and this building was built in 1795. So all of that's to say that in the image on the right, you'll see just an example of how the zoning maximums could play out in a massing study that staff here did with a maximum height of 65 feet and FAR of 5. But given all these colliding and clashing planning contexts, it's really hard to encode what we'd actually want to see in the built environment in the zoning on this site. So zooming out, Seth is going to now cover a little bit about the RFP that gave us this site.
And I think Diana might be covering that.
Thanks, Diana.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. So one of the things that we really do want to call out for all the commissioners tonight is that Within the RFP text, as Ted mentioned, there was explicit language about how many of the existing or planned buildings for this area are as tall or even taller than what is being proposed. So we wanted to zoom you out a bit and give you a little bit of that context. What you're seeing here are some of the development that's currently under construction for the Mass General sites. And really understand the evolution of Cambridge Street, which is really, evolving and changing in terms of character, descending from, heights of upwards of 280 feet down to that smaller scale context. So although our zoning is the 65 feet, as Ted highlighted here, within the writing of the RFP, we did explicitly call out that it would be expected, right, that the selected developer would seek a variance through the ZBA to allow for building heights that exceed that 65-foot height limit, given that existing already built context. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it back to Christina, the proponent.
Great. And the proponent, just a heads up, we'll put 10 minutes here on the clock for you.
Great. I will go ahead and share my screen. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Megan Altendorf, Design Director at Mass Design Group, and I will be presenting the West End Library development tonight. I'm joined by our development partners, POA and Cass Capital, as well as TAT, the architect of record, and G2 Collaborative, the landscape architects for this project. Here's some quick stats on the program. This 165-foot, 14-story building will be a community beacon, grounded by a 2-story public library with 12 residential stories above, creating 119 new units of affordable housing. The project is located at a key intersection of Beacon Hill and the West End, offering an opportunity for the project to meld and reflect these two contrasting urban characters. Here are some images of the project site and its existing condition. To its west and north are the large towers and institutional buildings that are hallmarks of the post-urban renewal neighborhood. To the east and south across Cambridge Street and Beacon Hill are buildings that are tied to Boston's historical iconography, including Charles Bulfinch's famed Harrison Gray Otis House next door and the Old West Church 2 doors down, which once served as the home of the West End Library. The West End's landscape was transformed radically after urban renewal, disrupting a once vibrant, culturally diverse community. The neighborhood had been rich in social and civic institutions, fostering connection and belonging. Joe McDonald, a third-generation West Ender, shared how past community ties have faded despite the area's resources. Inspired by Eric Kleinenberg's Palaces for the People, we see this project as a chance to restore the social infrastructure that once made the West End a hub of connection. Now fast forward to the future West End. The project's massing and design is driven by the character of the existing neighborhood fabric. Adjacent buildings reflect different eras of the West End, allowing the project's massing to engage with their scales, datums, and materials, creating a design rooted in its context. We have established an appropriate height and scale for the building, keeping within the ranges of density already existing in the West End. We've also pushed the bulk of the building north, maximizing the public realm and minimizing shadow impacts on adjacent structures. To illustrate these massing moves, the following sequence demonstrates how the project is developed to integrate into the West End neighborhood. First, we set back the building mass 22 feet from the property line, establishing a large public realm along Cambridge Street. Then we've set back the tower at level 6 in an effort to maintain the scale of the urban street wall that exists along Cambridge Street, while complementing the proportions of the Otis House and Old West Church. In an effort to revive the streetscape activity of the Old West End, we've shaped a large public plaza adjacent to the Otis House by sliding the 2-story volume of the library west. We've also created a private open space for the library aligned with Joy Street, forming an alley-sized park referencing the former location of Chambers Street prior to urban renewal. Next, the two-story library volume slides north, expanding the open space along Cambridge Street, and features generous window walls along its frontage, connecting the library space visually to the neighborhood. The upper tower is then sheared strategically to the west at the residential elevator lobbies, moving the mass of the tower away from the Otis House and providing more breathing room between the two buildings. Lastly, the perimeter walls of the rear tower mass are extended up to create a continuous screening element to hide rooftop equipment, further breaking down the bulk of the tower. And again, here's a view of the final massing, rotated now from the southwest. Now I will shift to the open space plan. Here's a view of the ground floor plan. North is page left. The publicly accessible open space is orange, abutting the Otis House property. We've been in conversations with Historic New England and view this space as a shared vision, which they plan to expand on with their own redevelopment of the Otis House Museum. The residential entry is adjacent to this open space and set back from the street. The library entry is located in the more prominent location on Cambridge Street, and we've created a generous front porch for the library depicted in light blue. And to the west, we see the small outdoor space dedicated to the library. Now I will pass to G2 to speak more to the landscape design.
Thank you, Megan. As Megan mentioned, the library addresses the street with a front porch-like gesture. As the sidewalk grade falls east to west, the library entry rises from the sidewalk grade to reveal broad steps on the western side nearest the library doors. Along with the steps, benches create a casual pausing spot to receive pedestrian traffic from along Cambridge Street as well as from the crosswalk. 4 new street trees continue the basic cadence of street trees along Cambridge Street and will ultimately create canopy over both the sidewalk and the library entry area. Next slide, please. Some of the wood seating elements will have arms and backrests, while in other places the seating will be tiered to provide multi-use playful moments in the space. This open space is designed to create an embracing edge to the possible future development at the Otis House. The metal edged planters deflect in plan alignment to allow for social eddy space and planted space while de-emphasizing but still allowing for the north-south vehicular maintenance lane. The plaza also provides opportunities to integrate historic markers or other storytelling moments to reference the rich history of the West End. Next slide. Here you can see the plinth of the library reinforced by the metal planters at the building face and the stair that emerges to the west as the grade falls east to west. And on the right side is the plaza space between the library and the Otis House. Next slide. And in this view, your back is to the Otis House and you see the plaza with its movable furniture and seating opportunities. You can see the visual connections through to the library straight ahead and the residential lobby to the right.
Right, thanks, Gigi. I'll go ahead and wrap up with our presentation with an overview of the facade design. While the building massing intentionally responds to its urban fabric, we've developed a facade language to organize these forms into a cohesive whole. We've worked to achieve harmony across the massing with a brick framework to tie the building together. This organizing frame also references the proportions of the Otis House. The design celebrates the community programming throughout the building, so community spaces are treated as subtle exceptions from the organizing architectural language of the rest of the building, seen here in red. Investment in high-quality materials gives the facade richness, form, and depth. On this slide, we see some examples of the proposed facade materials and examples of the Cambridge Street context throughout history. We aimed to honor the West End's history without replicating historic details, creating a modern building that bridges past and present through layered facade materials. The brick frame organizes the massing, while textured infill panels reference historic shutters and lap siding. For community spaces, a specialty panel emphasizes connection, while the library features a rougher brick texture symbolizing urban renewal's impact and distinguishing it as a lasting civic institution. We emphasize this concept of historic layering through the facade, with layers of brick representing different eras of the West End. The library facade contrasts the residential brick detailing, reading as a more monolithic yet transparent form, reflecting its role as a welcoming civic anchor, literally and figuratively supporting the housing above. And I will end here with 3 key views of the project. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Megan and Gigi, for a great presentation. Diana, do we have any urban design slides?
We do. We can pull those up. So we first want to start off with the site plan. I think there are a couple of elements we really want to draw your attention to as commissioners. The first is really understanding how the Otis House property and the West End Library and Housing Project here really work together from an open space standpoint, and how will those shared spaces really engage, and are we being thoughtful about the design interventions there to ensure that this reads as a unified composition and also operates that way. We also want to investigate how decreasing pavement, especially pavement that is coming closest to the sidewalk, can enhance the pedestrian experience. So there's currently a lot of paved paths, and really want to look at opportunities to enhance greenery in this part of the neighborhood. We also want to ensure that as we're thinking about the sidewalk itself, how do we understand how these key transition points where the property line ends are being thought of, specifically on the Otis side, as well as on the west side here, and imagining how these different sidewalk transitions and varying widths inform your experience of the site. And then finally, we also want to think about whether there are low vision navigation possibilities that could help us sort of remove the stair adjacent to the prowl and really create a much more welcoming and accessible condition to the entrance of the site. And if we go to the next slide, we do have a couple of comments to share as well as it relates to the massing and articulation. This is certainly a handsome composition. We want to continue to sort of emphasize the distinctiveness of the library while integrating it into the overall composition. And I think specifically, I'm going to jump down to element number 4 here, really understanding how this distinctive composition relates to the core, and whether or not we want to be more intentional about integrating it into the overall massing approach. Or more purposefully contrasting it to that composition. We also want to focus a bit on how to call out that this is a library. Libraries across the city are, I just think about the library in JP, right, that has this sort of canopy and awning that really draw your attention as a civic space, and is there further refinement or articulation there? And then finally, I think the team has really developed a thoughtful material approach, but we want to continue to work on the coloration of the predominant frame and the infill panel material, and make sure we're striking the right balance from a contextual standpoint.
Thank you, Diana. That's great information. And we're going to move to the commissioner comments now. If we could pull up a site plan for the commissioners to reference, that would be great. I don't know, Megan or Gigi, if you could do that, please. Great, I see it coming up. And the commissioners will be sharing comments that will guide the work that we'll continue to do with you. So we are not asking you to answer or address any of these comments tonight. But we will go ahead and start with Catherine. And just a note to the commissioners, we had a lot of robust public comment in our last project and are expecting more for the projects that are coming. So I just ask you to keep your comments compact, and that way we'll be able to get all of the voices in today. Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to understand that the current footprint or square footage of the library, does that remain the same or does it shrink? Because I'm trying to understand in context to the overall project.
Sure, I can answer that. So right now, I believe the library square footage is about 5,000 square feet, and folks from the city, correct me if I'm wrong. The new library that's proposed will be 19,000 square feet.
Okay.
So it's getting significantly larger.
Appreciate that. I do want to just double down on something that Diana pointed out, is that there's not enough of distinction and signaling that this is a library. It kind of blends in and people can miss it. And so for residents that are entering at another entrance, or for people looking for this building, it does that base, the library part does not, it's nothing distinctive about it. So I just challenge you all to think about what that could be as it is part of the community.
Thank you, Catherine. Shauna?
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm actually not going to comment on the landscape because I think I agree with all of Diana's points. I think they were excellent. I just want a point of clarification. Is this architectural team designing the library? I thought there may be another architectural team designing the library. And then I would like to understand how that review process is going to go ahead. Maybe Megan, you
So
could
I
address
can,
it.
sure, I can answer the first question. We are not designing the library interior. We're designing the core and shell. So
Okay.
BPL will have their own design architect for the interior library space.
But you are designing the exterior.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
And Shauna, this
That
is
answers my question.
And this is a similar model to the Chinatown branch with which the same commission, you all as commissioners reviewed as well. So it's core and shell delivery, and then the BPL has a really robust architectural team that will focus on the interior fit out and the design and programming of that space.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shauna. Kathy?
Yes, thank you. Great presentation and really, really interesting project. I'll echo the previous point about calling out the library more distinctively. I think that isn't coming across, at least in the presentation, and maybe in committee. There's more we'll learn on that. I would like to understand, as the design goes, the projection at the front of the building on the third or fourth floor and above. That feels to me like it may be competing a bit with the historic buildings nearby. It doesn't seem to, and plus I'm not sure that I understand its composition in relation to the rest of the building, and I'd like to just understand that better. And I think it might be a matter of what's going on the inside, but as the rest of the building is very contextual and seems to be also almost it fits in beautifully. This seems to make it this feels to me like a jolt in the facade, and I would like to understand it better, particularly in relation to the adjacencies. And then I'd also like to understand a little bit more about the line with the Otis house next door, and where where the flow may be across property boundaries, and how that will work and how it will be managed. Where is loading Where's drop off? And literally, how will this space be managed? Will it be as library patrons go, and the management of 24-hour access along this edge? What will be the treatment of people after dark? Things like that, given that this is private above and public at the ground level. I think it would just be important to understand that in relation to the design and accessibility. Again, 24 hours or at least 18. But that's it.
Thank you, Kathy. Anne Marie?
Thank you. Very exciting project. I'd like to just add to the comments. This is a very important transitional site and mediates the transition between several different contexts. And it's not clear to me that you described the manipulation of the massing, but I'd like to understand how the design of the facade itself begins to respond to those different contexts. And then I think I'm really intrigued by the relationship of the new structure to the Otis House, and can't help but wonder if there's an opportunity to really increase the focus on that space, that public space that links the two, and think about, one thing that's not clear to me, although I see some indications on this plan, is, where are the entrances, and thinking about where are the sorts of places that, just knowing that street, I would want to hang out or I would want to spend time. And quite frankly, I would be more attracted to the smaller scale Otis House than a front porch along Cambridge Street with a heavy overhang. So I just encourage you to think about the comments about, how do you, what constitutes civic, how do you signal that there's a building entrance? And then how do we really knit, or how do you knit this structure, both the library and then the tower above, into the surrounding landscape? And I think there's an opportunity for some more subtlety than is there at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Bill?
Yes, thank you for the intriguing presentation. There's a lot to like about this building. I am not personally troubled by the height because it's certainly on the edge of a neighborhood that is full of tall buildings. I think the materiality is quite beautiful, as a matter of fact. I also, with the exception of third, fourth, and fifth floor, which we'll talk about in a minute, think the understatement of the window patterns on the lower levels, 2 levels, and above the 6th floor, if maintained, they're elegantly designed. So the one issue, and I fear it is potentially overwhelming the building, is the issue of the projection of floors 3, 4, and 5. So Kathy raised that with certain words. Anne Marie just did. Someone, maybe it was Anne Marie, used the word heavy overhang of floors 3, 4, and 5. And I think that is getting us it's getting in the way of what could be a very elegant building. That overhang is extending 10 to 15 feet to the right, and it's extending 10 to 12 feet probably towards the street. And we're sitting next to a building that is so beautiful in its simplicity and proportion. And I would argue the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floor is bringing a complexity to the building being presented that is really unnecessary and gets in the way of a really beautiful building. So I would love to think that the architects might go back and look at that single question in what otherwise looks like a potentially beautiful building.
Thanks for your comments, Bill. Kirk?
Yeah, I think Bill and others have done a great job talking about some very thoughtful design, architectural design work, and massing ideas. So I'm going to focus on the plaza a little bit, and I agree with Diana that introduction of additional green space in this oasis. I mean, it really is one of the few places that could be a really beautiful respite along Cambridge Street. So, looking forward to the design. In particular, I'd love you to focus a bit on the lighting strategies, both bollards, building lighting, and then also the opportunity to maybe give BPL some more daylight, whether it's a pylon sign or something else that might stand out. Given that you have this plaza and you have long views to the site. So the one building comment I will make is I really appreciated the last slide you presented, which included the views from the City Hall Plaza side of Cambridge Street towards the building, because given its prominence above the smaller building next to it, these other elevations are going to get, they're going to be important. And so the view in the lower left-hand corner and even the one on the upper left, I think are as important as the one on the right, and how the building presents itself in the longer views and could be quite important. So I think this can turn out to be a great project. I look forward to seeing what you do next. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk. Laura? We're missing your audio, Laura. I think you're just on mute. We're still, I think you're still on mute, at least on my screen.
How about that?
There, great.
Thank you. Could we go back to the site plan? And it really clear, terrific presentation. And I appreciate that at this early stage in the project, or early to us. I want to understand more about how pedestrian circulation works and what the overlay of servicing is. So a diagram that shows the difference between those would be great. As well as understanding what the Otis House property, I understand that we don't, you don't control that, but that's such a stark line there. I'd like to understand if that's their loading area and how that works. So add that to the diagram. And I would also like to know how you see the courtyard area, the alleyway, which I like very much, how you see it being used, right? You have both residents and library patrons using it. And I guess I'd like a day in the life of the plaza from, a weekday to a weekend. And I would love to see some sections or a way to really get a sense of the scale of this, and particularly a section that goes through to the Otis House property so that we can understand what the distance is there. Let me see. Oh, and in doing that diagram of the circulation, it would be good to see where the overhang actually is in plan. I know that you've peeled it back so that we could see this plan, but I think it would be important to understand how much of the plaza it actually covers. And last, have you done sunshade diagrams?
Yes, they're in the PNF.
Okay, it might be good to pull those out next time, just so that we can understand them. Do you also have wind studies, or are you not that far?
Yes, also, yes, they're also in the PNF.
Okay. Might be great to talk about those next time, just to see what's what. Otherwise, I think the other commissioners made some great points, and we'll leave it at that.
Linda, just a final, I just want to piggyback on what Laura has just talked about, because I think it's right on. Just to piggyback one more request, which is within that kind of day in the life, it would be helpful to see kind of programming diagrams of the scale of activity. So you have a reading room outside, how many chairs, and because this could be a really vibrant outdoor space. And I'd love to see an experimentation during subcommittee. Right now, a lot of the planting is sort of surrounding the foundation of the building. And just wondering if there's a way in which some of the planting could be freed from the building and you could actually see the building sort of meet the ground. But I just want to say that I think this is a really interesting building and I really support it. I think it's going to be a unique building that sort of bridges between history and the future. So I really think it's great.
Thank you, Mick Young. Thanks for jumping in since we can't see your
Sorry.
raised hand. No, you got to do it.
I got to do it.
I'll add just a few comments. I really liked what Bill said. I would encourage in subcommittee that you come with some of the maybe earlier massing studies that you did that potentially looked at not having that overhang. I think there's so many handsome things about this building, and that's the piece that feels most troublesome to me. And then the other thing I'll add, there's a lot of paving on this site in an area of the city that has a lot of paving. And I think coupled with the Otis House property, and I know they may have some plans of their own, but it feels like this could be a completely different place if we thought about it more as kind of a softscape park that also allowed some of the service requirements to occur. And so I wonder when you come to subcommittee if you could kind of flip that paradigm for us and be thinking about how this might have more green space and less hardscape. And also what that experience might be as you're coming along the sidewalk, since you'll be looking up at this plaza in some of that frontage. Christina, I think we are ready for any public comment.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Sarah, we have promoted you. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Thank you so much.
Great.
Hi, my name is Sarah. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the executive pastor of the Union Combined Parish, of which Old West Church is a part, and where I've served for over a decade. At this point, I'm a little concerned when Old West is mentioned, but we have not been reached out to for any of the conversations in which maybe we're not talking to the community just yet, and maybe this is just staying within the BPL and within residents. But it is odd to see Old West and Otis House mentioned when these maybe community groups, maybe Otis House has been reached out to, but I know for a fact that Old West has not. And so as one of the only 2 remaining historical sites in the West End, and as a group that has actively sought to be a community center and has spent the last decade transforming our front yard from grass to a vibrant food forest, I'm deeply concerned that some of this, the height, is going to cover the fact that we will not be able to have as long of a growing season. And it's also, I am concerned, I would like to see how construction is going to, how we're going to assess that to impact both Otis House and Old West. What are the mitigations that are going to be provided to make sure that maybe the foundations, nothing is impacted for these 2 historic buildings? As a nonprofit, it's very difficult for us to ensure that this historic gem, it remains in tip-top shape. And so there is going to be a high inundation of construction in that area, continuing from Mass General, this property, of course, and then looking at of course, the Hurley building in the future. And so I would love to know how, obviously in the future, this plans to deal with the flow of traffic and also the care of the existing buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Jeanette, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you. I'm Jeanette Herman. I live in the neighborhood. I think it's a really exciting project that we're being presented with here. I have some significant concerns about the impact of the proposed truck access across that public access open space on the east side of the building. And I think maybe if you guys can see the site plan, you'll understand it better. The PNF specifies that trucks will be able to pull in on a 12-foot lane that goes across that public open space. I think that's probably why it's all paved. But the worst from my perspective is that they will then need to back out onto Cambridge Street to leave. That will carry them across a busy sidewalk, across a bike lane, and into very heavy traffic. It'll be within 70 feet of a crosswalk and near a blue bike hub. It's a really busy spot. Whole Foods is adjacent to the site, so a lot of traffic is turning across both lanes of all the lanes of Cambridge Street here. The bike lane is interrupted in front of this site because there's a bump out. There are lots of emergency vehicles that add to the confusion, ambulances traveling this street on their way to Mass General a couple blocks away. And there's a fire station across the street. The Vision Zero database lists 12 bike incidents, 8 motor vehicle incidents, 5 pedestrian incidents in the past 10 years in this immediate area between Staniford and Blossom Street. I hope that the commissioners will ask the proponents to address the experience in the public realm, particularly with respect to the sidewalks and the bike lanes. This feels like a very, very dangerous place to have the trash and moving trucks backing across all that public space. I have other concerns about the public realm. I don't think that courtyard is really much of a courtyard. It's got planters in it. It's an area that the neighbors have asked a lot of institutions to close their open green spaces because of the behaviors that have been problematic for the residents of buildings along Cambridge Street.
Jeanette, I'm sorry. I'm so
you.
sorry to interrupt you. If you have longer comments, though, we invite written testimony to bcdc@boston.gov, and I can put that in the chat here.
I've got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeanette. Commissioners, I see no additional hands raised at this time. So with that, I turn this back over to you, Commissioner Easley.
Thank you, and thank you, Sarah and Jeanette, for your comments. Commissioners, we need a motion.
I move that we send it to the design subcommittee.
Yeah, I second that.
Thank you, Bill and McDonough. And all in favor, please say aye. Shauna?
Aye.
Nick Young Kim?
Aye.
Kathy Kotarides?
Aye.
Anne Marie?
Aye.
David? David Manfredi still with us? Doesn't look like it. All right. Catherine Morris?
Aye.
Bill Ron?
Aye.
Laura Solano?
Aye.
Kirk?
Aye.
Myself, Linda Eastley, aye. Look forward to seeing you all in subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is our last project, but not our last agenda item for the night, which is 920 Center Street, and McYoung and David Hassine are both recused from this project. And this is the first presentation to BCDC of this project. And Ted, I think we are ready for planning staff overview.
Great, thank you. So kicking off this one, 920 Center Street proposes a reuse of an existing convent, existing former convent that is a 50,000 square foot structure that would contain 38 residential units, and then behind it and attached would be a new building that would be 171,000 square feet, contain 85 units in a 4-story building. Important to note overall, this site is 3.3 acres. Next slide, please. So setting this rather large site in its context, open space planning is quite important in this context. This is also on the Greenbelt Protection Overlay District, which I mentioned earlier in our review of the project on the Jamaicaway. Likewise, this is on one of the Greenbelt Protection Overlay Districts in Jamaica Plain for the Arborway. And I'll remind folks that that overlay is designed to protect open space along the edges of these parkways, and that's the front of this site. Additionally, the Department of Conservation and Recreation is undergoing a redesign process for this intersection. Anyone who's familiar with it right now, this is a pretty large traffic circle, a rotary, and the proposed design builds in a larger open space buffer on the state's land that I'm sure the proponent will talk about in their proposal. But right now, the sidewalk and the road just beyond it abuts the property that's outlined in red, and there'll be an open space buffer between the road and this property on the state's land in the future once this project is realized. Next slide, please. As proposed, the project needs only one item of zoning relief, and that's for the rear yard setback. And this district is a conservation protection sub-district. And as is noted in the zoning, these districts are established to promote the most desirable use of land and siting of development in areas with special natural or scenic features in accordance with a well-considered site plan, and to protect the and enhance the natural and scenic resources of Jamaica Plain. So the site design is going to be particularly important for the landscape architects among us to pay attention to, and the zoning code calls out the site plan specifically. As proposed, the project is putting forward an 18-foot rear yard setback. Against the rear yard on the other side of that property line is the Arboretum. So this is an important neighbor, but also through the zoning, it allows staff in the Article 80 process to grant to effectively grant zoning relief. It allows the rear setback to be set by BPDA staff through the review process. And while zoning requires 50 feet for non-Article 80 projects, in this instance, an 18-foot setback would be appropriate as part of the goal of the overall zoning for CPS districts. And then also keeping in mind that Greenbelt overlay that protects the open space on the front of the site, that also informed the staff review that thinks this setback is appropriate. So to delve a little bit more into detail on this design, I'll now hand it over to Diana. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. So one of the key elements of this project is, as you have heard with many other housing projects here, we certainly want to incentivize residential development across the city while ensuring that we're minimizing those impacts to site and some of the abutting neighbors here. One of the key pieces we want to call out is the existing monastery building. This is a building that we've been working with our colleagues in Landmarks to really understand the historical importance of this building in the context of the site composition, and ensuring that we're taking best practices to preserve the existing monastery. We have also really worked closely with the team to enhance the historic relationship of the monastery to the Arborway, and specifically thinking about how to enhance that front yard and make it more publicly accessible. If you drive by today, it's a little turnaround with lots of pavement, and there's certainly a lot of opportunity to enhance that space. In addition to that, there's a significant amount of mature canopy on this site. And as Ted noted, in the zoning, it is a priority of the CPS zones. And we want to work with the proponents here to preserve as much of that canopy as is possible. We've also want to make sure that we are being sensitive to minimizing both visual view shed impacts and shadow impacts to the Arboretum, specifically looking at the articulation of the massing and its overall composition to ensure that this project is a good neighbor to the Arboretum.
Great. Diana, anything else that you wanted to share at this point?
No, I think we'll go ahead and let the proponent complete their presentation, and then we'll share a couple of our design comments at the end.
Thank you. So I think we're ready for the proponent team. 16 Penny, Haseen, and Mik-Young Kim are the team, and then have Diana share some of those urban design comments, and then we'll dive into commissioner comments.
Hi, my name is Paul Bacala, and I'm with the proponent, 16 Penny. I'd like to thank the Commission and Boston Planning for inviting us here this evening to present our project to you. I know it's getting late, so we will move through this as quickly as possible. As Ted mentioned, the site is the former home to the Port Clare Sisters, a cloistered order of nuns that purpose-built and occupied this site for almost 90 years. While it no longer met their needs, they've been sensitive about its repurpose, and these considerations have guided the proposed redevelopment and influenced the goals that we've set for this project. First and foremost among those is to create new housing. This includes 123 total units, with 38 of those dedicated to seniors in the existing monastery building. While the structure is not historically significant, we have it occupies a prominent position along Center Street, and over the years has become a local landmark as the JP community has grown around it. Also, as Diana mentioned, the front of the monastery is currently not very accessible, and one of our goals is to improve the accessibility, improve the landscapes, and add additional infrastructure. To help us bring this vision to reality, we've assembled what we believe to be an excellent design team. We have David Haseen and his office working on the architecture, along with Mik-Young Kim's team on the landscape architecture. And with that, we'll have Matthew Mankey from David's office and Brian Cho from Mik-Young Kim's office bring you through the design for this project.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Matthew Mankey, and I'm with Haseen Architects. Dive right in. 920 Center Street is uniquely positioned within Jamaica Plain, adjacent to the Arnold Arboretum and within close proximity to Jamaica Pond and Franklin Park. These connections to Boston's Emerald Necklace strongly inform our site planning and massing strategies, ensuring that the project both respects and enhances its natural setting. The site is also surrounded by a mix of residential uses, including single-family homes and multi-unit dwellings, making it an ideal location for a thoughtfully integrated housing development. Just to show you a bit of our initial massing development, our design has evolved over multiple iterations, prioritizing scale, transparency, and contextual sensitivity. Initially conceived as a 5-story bar building, we've refined the massing in response to site conditions and stakeholder input. Very early on, we introduced a central courtyard to break up the massing and enhance natural light penetration between the two buildings. Further refinements led to a more porous scheme, embedding the landscape into the site and offering visual permeability through strategic view corridors. Ultimately, we decided it was important to reduce the height from 5 to 4 floors, maintaining the key dimensions of the courtyards while preserving the monastery and existing brick site wall. Current massing. Building upon our previous massing studies, we have arrived at a 4-story strategy that aims to integrate more seamlessly with the existing monastery while maximizing openness and connectivity to natural beauty of the site and its surroundings. The key refinements include massing reduced from 5 stories to 4, as seen by the dashed line of previous schemes, and then the lower 4-story scheme wrapping the side. Another key refinement was retaining 3 strategic view slot corridors that penetrate the building to enhance visual permeability and strengthen the relationship with the landscape. Also preserving the monastery and its existing site wall, obviously, and establishing the rear courtyard's proportion to maintain its historic character. Further carving and massing setbacks to maximize opportunity for private and common outdoor spaces on the upper floors of the building. Again, for further context, the site section area views from the existing context here show an overall site section cut through the center of the courtyard and starting from the base of Moss Hill on the left side of the page, across Center Street through the monastery, the courtyard, the new building, and the existing brick wall at the rear of the property, and then extending downhill into the Arboretum. The aerial views shown at the bottom show the existing site and its surrounding context as seen from Google Earth. Quick view of our ground floor, which shows the senior housing units with the monastery colored in orange, units in the new mass timber building to the rear colored in green, and then amenity space dispersed between the 2 buildings colored in blue. Building elevations. The revised 4-story scheme is carefully scaled to integrate within the surroundings. As seen, this was the previous scheme. As you can see, this is the existing tree canopy, which was generated with a LiDAR scan to get accurate heights. And then the current scheme, dropping that floor down, wrapping this side of the building around the monastery to gain that mass on the north side of the property. The west elevation illustrates the reduced height and the articulation of building forms to align with the site's historical character. The east, south, and north elevations illustrate the careful modulation of the massing by stepping the new construction forwards and backwards and maintaining a rhythmic balance of solid and void. The building aims to reinforce the scale and texture of the surrounding residential neighborhood while offering contemporary yet sensitive architectural expression. These adjustments reinforce our commitment to contextually sensitive development that enhances both livability and public experience. Materiality. The material palette draws inspiration from the existing monastery, utilizing custom profile terracotta panels to create warmth and depth, handmade long format bricks to establish a timeless tactile quality, warm bronze toned metal panels to complement and enrich surrounding architecture. These choices will combine to result in a contemporary yet respectful response to the site's historic fabric. Resident courtyard view. The resident courtyard is designed as a quiet, contemplative space offering privacy and comfort, especially for seniors to look into and occupy. Sun and shade shift throughout the day, creating a dynamic and tranquil retreat. The new brick 2-story volume on the left side of the page aligns with the monastery's arcade on the right side of the page, opening up to the sky, enhancing the sense of serenity. Last view, pickup drop-off plaza. A generous, open, and comfortable drop-off that links the 2 buildings and emphasizes the merging of architecture and landscape. Careful calibration of new architecture and materials to the existing monastery include brick, residentially scaled windows, an entrance canopy, etc. Elements like balconies and new dormers offer a finer grain to the design that provides variety and a sense of collection of buildings. With that, I will hand it off to Brian Cho from the landscape design team.
Thank
2
you,
minutes,
Matthew.
Brian.
Great. As we dive into the landscape design, our goal has always been to support the health and well-being of the residents and nestle the building into a verdant garden that leans into the biodiversity of the plants and pollinator-friendly practices. This site is historically rich. A big component of the existing site is the wall that defines the limit of the cloistered courtyard.
Up until last year, this area has been continuously used by the nuns of the monastery and has not been seen by the public. As part of the historic connection to the site, we're retaining that wall and letting it be a natural boundary between the purely residential areas of the site and the more public-facing areas. Next slide. Just zooming into the front of the site, it shows how we're retaining that historic turnaround in the front of the monastery, but integrating it into the site as flexible program space. The main driveway is on the left-hand side, on the south side of the site, where vehicles will go to the drop-off and the garage entrance. The frontage zone in its existing condition is mostly lawn with a few significant trees. The design transforms this area into a more resident-focused garden plantings with softer materials. For the public realm improvements, we're including a new sidewalk that links to the Arbor Way Murray Circle improvements to the north of the site, as well as blue bike stations and a bus stop improvement. Next slide. Pedestrian circulation shows our main pedestrian access connects axially to the historic monastery. To make the site and historic building accessible, we're grading the site down to a lower floor than the existing condition. You can see the elevation compared to the courtyard elevation. The site itself has a lot of undulating grades that slope to the west and to the north, making accessibility a careful consideration for the site design.
That's
Next
10
slide.
minutes, Brian.
Okay, thanks. This is just planting, and then I'll just show you the two renderings that we have. If you go to the next slide. This just shows the old and the new buildings coming together with the landscape bridging the space. And then the last slide is the garden frontage to the monastery and the driveway that crosses through the historic wall. I think we're very aware of the site's historic context and importance as a landmark to the community, and we want to ensure that the development of the landscape creates a space that feels new and natural while honoring the substance of the site context. And with that, I think we're looking forward to working with the commission to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Paul, Matthew, and Brian. I think Diana is going to share urban design.
Absolutely. So we want to leave you with a couple of thoughts here as you engage in your deliberation. The first is that we want to continue to sort of enhance the physical and visual barrier between the Arboretum. We had heard specific feedback from the Arboretum around the closeness of the building itself and its impact to view sheds. So really looking to work with the team to address that particular edge and whether there are opportunities to expand the buffer zone to create more of a separation there. We also want to make sure that the massing of the building and the planted zone allows for the best outcome from a vegetation standpoint. So again, increasing those buffer zones could also enable for more of that rich vegetation to mature over time. We also want to continue to consider the entry experience. Specifically, how can the changes in pavement material or width enhance or create a portal transformation? Is there an opportunity to create a moment here similar to how that flex entry plaza zone is functioning both as a drop-off and also as this community space? And we similarly think that there could be opportunities on that pickup edge. And with that, I think if we go to the next slide, I can share a little bit on the architecture. We want to be really mindful of the materiality and the relationship between the old and the new. We do think that the material palette that the team has shared is certainly akin to many of the existing materials on site, and want to figure out how the interventions that are happening to the monastery relate to the new, more contemporary mass behind it, and specifically how the tectonics of the materiality builds a more explicit relationship or logic between the existing building and the new addition behind. So there's a lot of cues and fenestration in that existing monastery that could potentially carry over into the building massing behind. And with that, I think that concludes our comments.
Thanks, Diana. Appreciate it. Can we have the proponent bring up a site plan to get us started on our commissioner comments? And I wanted to compliment the team on a really thorough and clear presentation as well. Kirk, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Very beautiful site that's hiding in plain sight. It's one of those places that's down the street, but I'm not really sure I fully understand it. So when you come to committee, I think it would be really helpful to see some longer views, because my sense is, given the setbacks and all the vegetation that's here, this is a very private site. But I guess I don't know that yet from the presentations. There were a lot of close-in shots, and then there were I don't think that the elevations did justice to the context and the screening that actually happens around it. So that would really help me understand the building and its setting. The other comment has to do with the elements on top of the very simple new massing that you've introduced. There are some green metal, it appears, masses that I don't fully think I understand how they fit in, or how they're integrated, or recall of the elements of the existing monastery building. So those might have been some concerns. But I would say, of the vignettes that you showed of the more pastoral places and contemplative places between the buildings, etc., it does look quite exciting and peaceful. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk. Kathy?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the very lovely presentation. I appreciate how you've seen this site and the challenges that it presents when trying to address the opportunity to create additional housing. And to that end, I want to thank you for seeing the efficacy of maintaining the historic monastery building, which I'll underscore, by today's standards would be considered historic. It may not have a inventory form and all the things that you may be searching down to substantiate that. But today, if we were surveying this neighborhood, we would say that is an important building for many social and architectural reasons. But I think the thing I'm more concerned about is the relationship of this site to the Arboretum, and particularly at the far back end, certainly within the wall that exists, and I appreciate that you're keeping that as well. But I do think when in committee, I'd like to see, as Kirk just said, the longer views that give us some understanding of the views from the Arboretum. And I would ask specifically to see perspectives on this from the gate of the Arborway Gate and the Honeywell building, just so that we understand what that short connection, or the portion of the back new building, as close as it gets to that wall, what that actually means in terms of height, and possibly shadow and related impacts possibly on the trees that I see there. Are those new? Are those being replaced? And what's happening just over the wall? The Arboretum is a wonderful public park, but it's also a scientific institution, and I think it's important for us to understand if there are impacts also on that that important space. To Kirk's question about materials, I too would like to understand that better. It feels to me like it's relating more to the tops of the building that are sort of a green copper color are relating more to the monastery building. And again, I'd like to see those materials as they relate to again, the arboretum side of the building. The only small matter I would call out is a little bit of explanation and understanding of the newly created entrance to the monastery building, just to understand what that, how you are approaching that, and how you see it relating to the overall site. I think that is a somewhat abrupt change, and I'd love to understand it better. But thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Anne Marie?
Thank you for the presentation. I think there's a lot to like about this, and there's an understatedness and an elegance to the design that I quite like about the project. One thing I'd really like to explore, discuss in subcommittee is the approach to this building or this project. What's exciting about it is negotiating the space between kind of the formality of the city, the orthogonal historic structure, and the pastoral landscape or park. And I was struck by one of the comments, or I've been part of the presentation about undulating braids. I sort of think about undulating landscape, and it feels, the current proposal feels a little rigid and formal and a bit corporate to me. And I would really love to see, I was actually quite excited by, in the massing studies, the angled bar proposal, and would just encourage you to think about ways to loosen up a little bit. And perhaps you let the historic monastery building, you will preserve it, but let it be more formal, but then let the newer buildings and the landscape open up a little bit to relate to the park behind. And also, I'd also in subcommittee like to, this would be an opportunity to maybe look at precedents, thinking about this is becoming a campus, and what does that mean within the landscape? Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Catherine?
Thank you. I agree with all the commissioners tonight in their comments. I have two. One is I actually would like to see more of the shadow studies and what this looks like mid-afternoon to evening. What concerns me a lot is the courtyard that will be shared essentially between both buildings, and I'm not clear about what that looks like from when it's really sunny and there's other elements. Like, what are the other factors to consider given the relationship between both buildings? Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Bill?
Yes, I have one comment. Let me, as a predicate for it, just thank Anne Marie for her comments a moment ago. But I agree that with everyone that there's a lot to like about this project. The one thing I just really want to compliment the team, the architectural team here, for, and it sounds like it's easy, but it's not, for getting the massing of the new building down to something very similar to the massing of the original building. And I just know that doing that is not easy, and it takes an incredible amount of careful organizing of floor plans, exterior space, and all of that. And to think here's a housing development with significant affordability aspects, and they've been able to get the massing of the building to be something so similar to the original. And I just want to compliment them, and I hope we don't push them into something that starts forcing them to add a floor or two to the new building, which would change the whole nature of this plan. So bravo to what we see.
Thanks, Bill. Shauna?
Thank you. Thanks very much for a very clear and very beautiful presentation. I have a bunch of scattered thoughts. First of all, my compliments to the project. The one area, and this may sort of go counter to what Bill said, but more in the direction of Anne Marie, that I have a lot of discomfort with is how close the pinch point is to the wall with the angle. So I not only first of all, I'd like to understand that better in terms of section and perspective, really looking at that. But it does, given that this is adjacent to the Arboretum with sort of big, robust trees, and we just have a little bit of landscape space along that edge, I'm wondering if there is some minor manipulation of massing that could free up that corner, that edge a little bit. A few other things. I think it is a very complex and lovely project and section. So I think we'd like to understand that section a little bit better throughout the whole project. I think understanding the depth of this project is actually going to take us a little bit of time because it's clearly a very complex project from a topography perspective. The other thing I would like to understand from a context perspective is the character of that street edge, not just on your property, but on the adjacent properties. Just so to understand what is the context, is there something you're reflecting, and is there something that you're trying to set up? Because it does feel like you're keeping the project very, very private. And is that, I'd like to understand if that's an intentional strategy and how that works with the adjacent properties. I don't know the site. I know, I've driven by the site a lot, but I've never really looked at the site closely. Yeah, so really understanding what is that public realm characteristic, because right now it looks like you'll be going along this, a huge, big, thick green buffer, and then all of a sudden there's just a blip of blue bikes, and then it's a big, big, thick green buffer again. And that might be the right approach or not. I just want to understand that better. And I think most of my other comments have been talked about by someone else already.
Thanks, Shauna. Laura?
I wanted to talk, well, first a clarifying question, and thank you for the presentation, which was very clear and certainly it leaves me wanting more, which is good. The red line, is that a wall? Did I miss that? Is that a wall?
It is a wall, yep.
An existing wall or proposed?
It is an existing wall that was part of the cloister of the monastery. So that area has always been part of the monastery.
Okay. Given that you're in the context of, not only the Jamaicaway, but also Olmsted, Olmsted's hands are all over this part of Boston. And I would like to understand, by zooming back, sort of what the relationship is to the Arboretum. I don't know if Olmsted had anything to do with the monastery. I'd be curious if you guys had found anything associated with that. But I would agree with Anne Marie that the paths are, I don't know how to form an opinion about the paths in a way, because, when I think about the Arboretum, there are these, a lot of really graceful paths that kind of negotiate the topography really beautifully. And you had mentioned that there were some undulations in the topo, and I'd love to see how the proposed paths are kind of locked in and supporting back and forth between the topography and the circulation. But again, that far out view to see exactly how the Arboretum kind of goes in with this piece. Have you looked at any precedents for this in terms of, you know, in the context that it is? Like, you know, what kind of historical research have you done? Like, was there a garden here that was with the monastery, and are there traces of it left in this design?
I'm sorry. There were gardens back there that the sisters basically had vegetable gardens. They grew a lot of their own food, and you know, other than that, it was landscaped. And there are, you know, we've preserved as much as possible back there.
Yep. Okay, and you're talking about on the Arboretum side, not the road side. Is that correct? Where the building is?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Within the walls.
Right. What happened in the front, or the roadway side of the monastery?
It was a more formal landscape, mostly lawn and larger trees. Pretty low maintenance. I think because of the context of the monastery not having, you know, an enormous maintenance budget. So it was it has been relatively unlandscaped in a way.
Right. And I can't remember who asked, but you know, what are there existing trees that you're able to save? And you know, landscapes are kind of funny because they have these sharp edges, right, called the property line, but the landscape really has no property line. I mean, the landscape, the big L landscape. And so I'm curious how your edges are going to combined with the edges of the Arboretum, and whether or not they'll feel seamless or there will be a threshold, if you will, between them. And if so, sort of what's, you know, what is that going to look like and what's it going to feel like? So I'd love to hear some more detail about the thinking with the planting that's proposed. And then you didn't talk about the roof gardens, which I know, you know, are part and parcel of the building, but maybe next time I'd like to hear a little more about those and see visually how they are connected to the site or not. So I know we weren't getting into that detail, but that would be great. So I think that's it. Olmsted, Olmsted, Olmsted.
Thank you, Laura. Jonathan, I think you're our last hand up.
All right, I'll bring it home. Great comments, and I'm struck by something Anne-Marie said. And I guess I'm eager to see your response on what it could mean to kind of quote unquote loosen up a bit. I mean, I guess for me that comes down to like honing in on your attitude for like this intersection between old and new. And I guess this is, and I'll say that I really appreciate the design. I think it's a great project. And I think there's kind of a balance between being deferential, paying homage, being kind of quiet and calm. But I do wonder, how do you then still assert what you're doing and have your voice for this product independent of that your sort of historic neighbor? So I think, how do we not just be calm but not too deferential, right? So I think that's something that I'm curious to sort of see what that looks like to me, loosening, and how you interpret what it means to loosen up. Again, I am excited to see what that could look like in terms of how it yeah, without breaking the sort of language you've developed, but maybe there's, you know, maybe it's a little more terracotta, a little less brick. I don't know, just something that kind of better creates more of a distinction perhaps between old and new. But overall, exciting proposal.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think of the like 7 or 8 things I jotted down during the presentation everyone has addressed, except for one, which would be my request, additional request, is just to have a little bit more information about the entry points and circulation to the proposed building and what those interfaces are with the landscape. How do you get in and out of the building? And what do you experience as you are coming in and out of the building, particularly with that resident courtyard, and that interaction with the open space would be really terrific. A lot of really good comments from the commissioners. Thank you all. And Christina, I think we are ready to see if there's any public comment.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Marie, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. Thank you for giving the neighbors the opportunity to comment on these projects. I would like to make 2 comments. The first one is that and I have reviewed extensively the project provided by the team. It looks like the impact on the trees of the arboretum is going to be significant because of the proximity of the building to the limit of the arboretum and the size of the building. So I would like to comment also that we need housing in Jamaica Plain. And my impression is that by wanting to keep the monastery, you are making your life more difficult. I have heard that the nuns had specifically requested that the monastery should not be used for a non-religious activity use. This has never been mentioned in the discussion. And I think if the monastery was not maintained, then there would be an option to move the building closer towards Center Street, which would lessen substantially the impact on the arboretum. And I, as you can hear, I come from Europe, so I'm very much attached to antique buildings. But for me, there is an imbalance between the efforts that are put into preserving the monastery versus maintaining the integrity of the arboretum, which has, not only historical status that has been in place for many decades, while the monastery does not have this status. I'm almost done. But the arboretum is also a modern treasure and a tool for scientific exploration. So I think, the balance between limiting the impact of the arboretum versus preserving the monastery for me is really skewed in this project.
Thank you, Marie Helen. Ryan Murphy, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes. Hi, guys. I'm Ryan Murphy. I live in Jamaica Plain, right near this site. I drive by this site quite a bit, and I do happen to like the existing monastery building, so I'm quite pleased that the developer put the effort into keeping the monastery as the main focal point when you're driving past the site. I think the dichotomy between the old building and the new is actually quite interesting. They made efforts to tie the architecture together, but it's a nice clash of new design and the original design. I think one thing I would like to see to better understand the project is just the existing landscaping versus what's proposed. But I'm sure we'll get to that as this develops. But just as a general comment, I'm very in favor of this project because of the need for more housing, not only in my local community, but in the entire city of Boston. So hats off to the developers for dealing with a difficult site and for executing it so beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Next up, we have Richard. Richard, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
First, I'm calling in from Amsterdam where it's 2 a.m., so if I sound sleepy, forgive me. I have a rather, well, I hold the real estate professorship at Harvard Design School, and where I also teach urban planning. And I am a big fan of the Arboretum. Briefly, I think the current design is frankly disastrous for the Arboretum. You're on essentially a four-story hill overlooking one of the historic buildings at the Arboretum, the Honeywell. And the current plan really creates a very overbearing 8-story structure from the road as you enter the Arboretum. It'll be in total shadow a significant amount of the time. And I think, well, we're all in favor of more housing. But I think this project as it is badly conceived. At the very least, I think from the Arboretum, it should be no more than 2 stories in the back. That would eliminate the big problem of how overbearing it is. I, I would recommend they go back to the drawing boards. I think there is a design solution that would have almost as many units. It would keep the low buildings close to the wall, and you could have an even 8-story building or something. It wouldn't perhaps have the balance that some of the architects prefer, but something close to the circle. So I really think there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done here before it would be acceptable.
Thank you, Richard. Larry Z, we have you next.
Hi, yes, I'm Larry. I'm a student, Mass Tech studying sustainability, and I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the choice of material for this project, particularly regarding the usage of mass timber as a primary building material. I think it goes without saying that we find ourselves in a rapidly warming world, and as a result, it's imperative that we consider not only operational carbon, but also embodied carbon if we're to have any hopes of realizing a decarbonized future. So I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate and applaud the development and design team of this project and their commitment to a more sustainable future forward, even at what's likely a pretty significant cost premium. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Sam, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Sam Jaxis. I've been looking for affordable housing for the last couple of years, specifically in the Jamaica Plains area. And there's really not a lot of affordable housing. And I want to say that I strongly support this project and commend the developers, the architects, the landscape architects for coming together and making this such a beautiful area. I also want to say I hope that we as a community don't become biased in the way that we look at things. And I understand that the developers already made concessions to the Arboretum and continues to do so. And I think for the project to be sustainable, both financially and for the community and for the environment, they're doing an amazing job. So thank you and kudos to them.
Thank you so much. I see William Ned Friedman. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. I'm Ned Friedman, and I'm the director of the Arnold Arboretum and a professor of biology at Harvard University. And I want to first of all thank John and his team for interacting with us over time and for sharing data and data files with us so that we can get an understanding of impacts on a research collection studying climate change, on a conservation collection that is incredibly important to genetic diversity of species that are threatened with extinction, and of course to the intact whole cloth of Frederick Law Olmsted's, one of his greatest designs. Every view shed in this space was intentionally designed to lift the soul. We have 2 concerns, and we remain focused on those concerns. How will the proposed development affect public views and the general integrity of the Arnold Arboretum's Olmsted-designed historic landscape? We are confident that there will be significant compromise. And how will the proposed development affect the health of the trees that we spend lots of time and effort going around the world to collect, to study? We are Harvard's Museum of Trees. Last year, there were 81 different research projects in the living collections, and basically almost 3,000 of our 16,000 accessions are plants that are of conservation value. You've heard of seed banks. We actually plant our rare genetics and grow it. The approach gets as close as 18 feet. Most of the trees, if you look at what I saw in the presentation on the back property line on the monastery side, will have to be removed. There will also be a two-story sub parking deck, which will compromise all the roots that are around there, and there will likely be very little left. We are also studying shadows, and I will tell you, we think initially that we were talking about removing light from trees from this project some 3 to 4 hours in the summer, and this will be something that will actually affect plant health. So I just want to let the commission know and the subcommittee, we've actually signed an agreement with Atelier 10, which we think is a very fine firm to help us understand the effects of shadows on our plant health, as well as to develop renderings of what it would look like. And I think it's important that when we look at renderings of view sheds, not just from the road from afar and not just in the summer, but in the winter, it's important to be in the collections. And what you will see when you look at that cloud of white pines is that that cloud of white pines only has a canopy at the very top of each tree. They're limbless for about 40 feet up. So if you were to walk in the collections, and I encourage all of you to walk in the magnolia collections, you will be staring at a solid wall 18 feet off the property line.
Sorry, Ned, I don't mean to interrupt you. If you have longer comments, we invite you to submit them in writing. And I'm happy to drop a link in the chat to the address for that. But thank you for your comments this evening and for staying up so late to join us. Rosetta, are you able to unmute yourself? Rosetta Elkin? You've been promoted to co-host. Are you able to unmute yourself? I see you put in the chat no. Do you want to try one more time?
Oh, it just worked.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you. I think the co-host piece worked. Thank you. It's really nice to see good colleagues and hear incredible comments about design. I believe deeply in design. I'm a landscape architect. I think there is a design solution here. Absolutely, that does everyone service, mostly the public. I think I don't want to over echo or sort of underline and underscore all the great comments that have been made. But I think as designers, one of our great challenges is parameters. One of the parameters is 50 feet. I think going from 18 to 50 is a big jump. I think Shauna pointed that out. I appreciate it. There is a middle ground where we can both provide housing and also not do damage to public space, because ultimately all of the green space you're seeing in the plans is private space. And so I think we all know that green space is not all created equal. I think when you shade out the magnolia collection and replace it with new magnolias, it's just not a one-to-one relationship. I don't want to repeat how graceful Ned was about what a living collection is, but the relationship between the proposed massing and the existing magnolia collection is very, very tenuous. And so with my last seconds or minutes, I would just implore the committee to think about what it means to go from 18 to 50 overnight. I would also implore the committee to really look carefully at the hydrology, which hasn't been mentioned. When you put a massive parking displacement unit, if we could call it that, the water will change. There is a major slope. The landscape architects, please put topography in your plans. Otherwise, they're basically diagrams. There's a big slope and you're stopping water, which means it's going to rush in flashier times into the collections. And so at the very least, if we can look at a soils report and a hydrology analysis, it would be helpful. So thanks for your patience, and also thanks for the respect and the time.
Thank you very much, Rosetta. Keel, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I'm an architect. I spend a lot of time working on the construction ecology of buildings, carbon cycles of buildings. There's many aspects of this design to appreciate, but there are some major liabilities that do relate to the public realm, but also relate to some of the aspects that they refer to as sustainability in the presentation. It's admirable to try to pursue passive house certification and mass timber construction, but those are completely dwarfed by the cost, the carbon cost and other environmental costs, hydrological costs of putting a 2-story concrete bathtub on this site so close to the Arboretum edge. That 50-foot setback needs to be observed. It's there for a reason. These are important landscapes, not just from a park point of view, but they are scientific research sites with a lot of embedded knowledge going back 150 years. It's very flippant to just build right up, 15, 18 feet away from that edge. There's a lot of issues that come along with that pressure along that back edge. So there's many other site solutions, housing typology, massing solutions that avoid those problems, that still add housing to the city and avoid some of the major traffic concerns that were brought up last night by the community. So I would encourage the commission to seek documentation that tonight's presentation to the commission really focused on just the buildings themselves. You need to see this building in context related to the Arboretum, in sections, thinking about hydrology, thinking about a whole set of viewshed issues. So I hope you have time and energy to work with this team and see the project more completely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, commissioners, at this time, I see no additional hands raised, so I'm going to close the public testimony portion of this evening.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for all of the public comments. I think we all as a commission learned a lot. I appreciate the way that you articulated those. And a thank you to the commissioners who also contributed some really thoughtful comments about how to move the project forward. And with that, commissioners, we need a motion for next steps.
Motion to send the project to committee.
Thank you, Kirk. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. And all those in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith? Shauna, do we still have you? Might have lost Shauna. Kathy Katarides?
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow?
Yes.
Catherine Morris?
Yes.
Bill Ron?
Yes.
Lara Solano?
Yes.
Kirk Sykes?
Yes.
And myself, Linda Eastley, yes.
And it looks like Shauna said aye.
She's back. Okay. Thanks, Shauna. All right, we'll see you all in subcommittee. Looking forward to it. And our final agenda item tonight is the informational presentation, and this is about the Article 80 modernization and also BCDC reform. And we appreciate our guests who have been patient with the evening. Kairos will be joining Nupur and Kevin, and Diana and Christina also already on the call will be participating as well. And so I'll go ahead and turn over the time to you all.
Good evening, everyone. This is Kairos speaking. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to have our staff come in front of you to formally present to you some of the Article 80 modernization work that we have been working on, and in particular to share with you the recommendations that we are considering for BCDC changes. So I'm going to turn it over to Nupur, who has been leading this effort, to give you a presentation, and I will be on the rest of this meeting to answer any particular questions at a policy level. So thank you. Nepal?
Thank you, Kairos. Good evening, commissioners. Appreciate you all taking the time after this very long meeting to hear us out. We were last before you, I think, in the fall to give you an update on the Article 80 action plan and the emerging recommendations at the time. And the goal today is to sort of catch you up on where we've been since September and focus really the bulk of our time with Christina and Diana's help on taking you through how some of those early ideas that we shared with you in September may now more specifically apply to BCDC. Before we jump into the slides here, I just want to give Kirk Sykes a shout out. He's on our steering committee for the project and has provided invaluable guidance throughout the last 18 months as we've come up with a lot of the work. So look, I think, at some point in the discussion, would love to kind of hear from you too about how the work is shaping and some sort of background on how we arrived at where we are today.
Sure.
Let's go to the next slide. I'll keep my portion of this very, very brief in the interest of turning it over to Christina to share more specifically about BCDC. But just as a reminder, the reason we're doing this and the reason we've been hard at work on this project for the last 18 months is because Article 80 is nearly 30 years old. It was put in place at a time when the development landscape in Boston looked very different. Our policy thinking has evolved significantly since then. And as a result of it, the onerous process that developers now have to go through does not feel proportionate to the input that we seek to provide for them. It leads to a lot of unpredictability. Average review times across projects are very, very unpredictable, where no two projects have the same experience going through our process. And on the community engagement side, the people that participate traditionally in our processes are not really representative of Boston at large. And so our goal through this work is also to make sure that we are being as inclusive in reaching out to populations that are impacted by development and thinking critically about the methods we use to do that. Next. As I said, we released our action plan in September 2024 that kicked off a 90-day comment period to ensure that we were sharing these recommendations very broadly with stakeholders in the development community, civic groups, with elected officials, with sort of other professionals in the industry. And we did that using, again, a lot of different engagement methods that we're trying to sort of recommend here as well. We got a lot of really rich and detailed feedback related to our three big categories of changes that have to do with effective engagement, consistent standards, and creating a coordinated review process, which will be the focus of today's conversation. Next. A little kind of flavor sample of who we heard from. I'm not expecting you all to read the names on the right, but this is just to give you an idea of really the set of stakeholders that have been engaged throughout the process and all sort of weighed in with very detailed and thoughtful qualitative feedback about recommendations in the action plan. It included about 100 different comment letters with that very specific feedback, as well as 307 responses to a survey that we had shared more widely through the planning department's channels. It was very heartening for us to hear that 83% of our survey respondents thought that we are generally headed in the right direction, and that was very strong validation for the work that we've been doing with Kairos and the city teams and the steering committee's leadership. Next. I want to give you a quick idea of sort of where the feedback is landing within our different categories of recommendations and actions. We have heard a lot of engagement, a lot of broad support for our engagement recommendations, especially to expand the methods of engagement that we use, right? We learned through our engagement in the first round that who we hear from is really sort of determined by how we reach out to them. And so as we think about how to do engagement differently within Article 80 going forward, we're going to be using a lot of those lessons learned and bringing in sort of more in-person, modern, tech-based methods, as well as sort of tactical engagement methods of meeting people where they are. That was an idea that had a lot of broad support. We had proposed an idea related to community advisory teams. This is sort of a new version of IAGs, which are impact advisory teams that are sort of groups of citizens that are appointed by elected officials to advise the planning department on mitigation and community benefits. CATs have an expanded scope from what IAGs do today. And there was a lot of support for expanding that specific scope and have them really review things more sort of from a planning lens to ensure that their feedback is translated across multiple projects. Definitions are not really sort of enforced for community benefits and mitigation, and that has been the cause and sort of the root cause of a lot of the unpredictability within the process today. So we heard broad support related to sort of streamlining and standardizing those definitions, as well as connecting the items that are sort of delivered as benefits and mitigation from specific projects back with priorities that are identified in planning. And then finally, you know, BCDC sort of recognizing this commission's role in moving development projects forward, we had a set of specific feedback that came out through recommendations within the action plan to do with sort of your role, right? And how we can realign it with where these reforms are taking us in the future. And Christina will share a little bit more about that as we get into the second half of the slide deck. There were, if you go back one slide, Lizzie, there were a few ideas that were lacking consensus, right? Where we heard from folks that, you know, these are great ideas, but the devil's in the details. And so kind of people were holding back their support for the items on the right. And this is just giving you an example of the different types of feedback we heard on the action plan. And so as we take the next step here, we're really focusing on building out and starting to implement and pilot some of the ideas on the left here where we do have broad support, while continuing to study some of these more complex ideas and recommendations on the right, and continuing to do that with the community and the sort of industry brought along to make sure that when we do develop details for some of these ideas, we land in the right place. Next. I want to share some specific context from earlier in the project too, from our first round of surveys, peer city research, as well as analysis of existing conditions that has to do with BCDC. That will give you an idea of where our specific recommendations emerge from. Overall, we heard from sort of developers when we initiated our very sort of detailed long form survey that only about half of them sort of understand exactly how the BCDC process works and understand how to address BCDC's concerns. This is something that we asked the development community well before sort of Diana and Seth and Christina implemented a lot of their existing operational improvements. And I'm sure if we ask this question again, we'd hear the answer would probably be very different. But it is important to sort of recognize and reflect the feedback that we heard at that moment in time, because that is a key sort of indicator of where folks want us to kind of focus the reform effort. In addition to that, we looked at, you know, across the board how peer cities do this differently. And a couple of things that stood out to us from Fort Worth as well as Seattle were that both of these cities do have professionals sort of outside of staff that review projects for specific design impacts and especially urban design impacts. But they do that within sort of very specific design standards and guidelines that probably vary from district to district in both of these cities. And that staff have a bigger role in sort of enforcing the guidelines and the recommendations of the commission throughout the life cycle of these projects. And then on the right here, under existing conditions analysis, you just see a couple of sort of specific pull quotes that we've heard from interviews that we conducted with folks in the development industry within that first round of engagement. Next. So what all of this leads us to really is, as we think about sort of taking in this feedback and defining our work plan and focus for the rest of this year, we're breaking up our effort into thinking about early actions, right? Which is building off of those areas where we do have high consensus. And focusing our implementation efforts on managing ourselves better, right? Really streamlining the planning department's internal operations and processes to ensure predictability. Thinking about how our boards and commissions sort of can help us move the needle in that direction, starting with, you know, talking to you all tonight. And then finally, looking at sort of where within the existing zoning code, we have opportunities to align practices in the code with the way we do business today. And then on the right are some long-term actions that, again, we need to study further, right? Where we don't have consensus built yet. And so we will come back to you at a future meeting, sort of several months out from now, to talk about those ideas more publicly. But I think today's focus really is on sort of those specific actions on the left here that are building off of these high consensus recommendations. And Christina is going to talk about how each of these buckets applies to BCDC. So I'll turn it over to her next.
Thanks, Sapor. Diana, do you want to kick us off or do you want to back clean up at the end?
I'll do it at the end.
Okay, great. Next slide, Lizzie. And apologies to the commission if the lights turn off. I'm just going to run out into the hallway, turn them back on. I know you can see them flashing. Okay, so a quick overview. I'm going to talk about what we're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about it. We have 6 discrete recommendations to talk to you all about this evening. 2 of them would require a sort of limited text change to Article 28. That's the zoning article that enshrines BCDC. Most of the recommendations we're bringing to you here tonight fall into that bucket that Nupur described as kind of operational or procedural reforms, ways that we can build off of the work that we've done in the last year to sort of streamline and in some ways expedite the review of the commission. So we're going to jump into these 6 quick recommendations. Next slide. The first recommendation is to improve the consistency of reviewers. So you know that today commissioners are assigned to subcommittee meetings based on commissioner availability and the kind of needed expertise in that particular subcommittee meeting on any given project. That means that sometimes a proponent might have a completely different slate of commissioners reviewing them from one subcommittee meeting to the next. So we are very interested in exploring a kind of dedicated sort of cohort, a permanent assignment of subcommittees that will follow a project through its life cycle. Each cohort would have the same sort of number of commissioners on it. And then we would have a third pool of commissioners that we're going to call like a float pool here that get assigned to one of the 2 cohorts sort of as needed. The other change embodied in this recommendation is that we would formalize what today kind of happens culturally, where we ask commissioners who spoke at the last subcommittee meeting to speak first when referring a project back to final recommendation. We would sort of formalize that by issuing a report from subcommittee when that project returns to full commission. This is the way I think that the Landmarks Commission sort of has operationalized this. We heard that the balancing, of course, who is assigned to each cohort really matters, and making sure that we review those cohort assignments on a kind of predictable schedule would be important to making sure that people are getting a varied experience and that there's no real differentiation in the performance of the 2 cohorts. Next recommendation. We also want to reform the way that the commission takes in public testimony. So today, folks can join the commission when the project is being introduced, when a project is at subcommittee, when a project is at receiving final recommendation. They can also submit written testimony to bcdc at boston.gov. And we've heard some sort of challenges in 2 directions, both from the public who may submit a comment letter. Let's say I'm a member of the IAG. I submit a comment letter to not bcdc at boston.gov. I submit that comment letter to a project manager or my city councilor. It's not making its way to the commission, even if the comment is germane to the scope of the commission's review. And that also means that commissioners aren't always seeing the full sort of complement of testimony, of public testimony that the planning department might be receiving unless it's being attentioned directly to you. So this is really a 2-step recommendation. One is we want to make sure that we're developing a shared online repository for community feedback so that all public comments received are posted in the same place and are always publicly accessible, regardless of the phase of review of the project. And we also want to reform when we are taking in live testimony. We've heard that it's very valuable to get the kind of live testimony that we were getting tonight when a project is being introduced for the very first time to help the commissioners understand the kind of dynamic context of a project. But we also know that sometimes members of the public mistake the commission for a public hearing, especially when the commission is issuing its final recommendations, which sometimes can politicize the forum in a way that was unintended by having had public testimony to begin with. Next recommendation. We want to initiate the commission's review earlier in the review process. So today, projects are entered into the commission review following a PNF. Sometimes that's immediately after a PNF has been filed. Sometimes that's closer to the next filing phase, so after PNF, but before a DPIR. But that time distance can represent a really big sort of evolution in the timeline of a project. So we want to make sure that we're bringing projects as close to concept, which today we refer to as a PNF filing, but really just having had at least one public meeting and one meeting with staff to evaluate a sort of single concept that's in front of the planning department. So that way proponents are taking in the commission's feedback and staff feedback, and that we're able to synthesize the two simultaneously rather than having them sequentially. This means also that the commission's review earlier on in the phase of the project would be more impactful, because we know obviously that proponents are sort of more resistant to making changes to a project when it's being introduced later in the project's review cycle. Next slide, please. We want to make sure that we are affirming the commission's advisory role. So today, culturally, what happens is that projects will linger in review until the commission reaches a kind of culture of consensus to recommend that the BPDA board approve. We want to do two things to address this culture. One is we want to change to whom the commission is issuing the recommendation. Today, this is to the mayor and the BRA board, but we know that often the nature of the recommendations that the commission is issuing are actually directives to planning department staff who are responsible for carrying out design review between the BCDC's review and when the BRA board issues an eventual approval. So that means then issuing the recommendations to the chief of planning, that's Kairos in this case, and the deputy chief of urban design, that's Diana, the two people who are sort of stewarding that design review process. The other thing we want to do is to focus on a training session sometime this spring that's focused on recommendation procedure. This requires no change in the zoning. Oh gosh, today, the zoning article 28 imagines that there is a recommendation of approval, but that there's also a recommendation for needed modification that the commission could issue. And we really want to focus on this needed modification recommendation. In the case of an approval, it's not really that the commission is approving, it's actually more that planning department staff should continue review, but that as proposed, the project achieves the primary objectives of the commission's review. In the alternative, in a needed modification, that means significant changes to the project should be considered and that the commission should clearly articulate what those changes are. Planning department staff should report to the commission which of those recommendations were adopted and which were not pursued. Please give me 1 second. I'm going to try to turn on a lamp here. Okay, thanks to whoever made it into the hallway. Next slide. Okay. Introducing formal meeting limits. So during the commission review, the sort of duration of the review can be somewhat unpredictable. Even variation between what we found in the 5-year analysis of the commission's operations is that the average length of the meeting varies between 3 and 6, but that differentiation in sort of time can mean a lot, especially as a project is getting closer to anticipated board action. So we want to test out having formal meeting limits that are aligned with the phases of review. So for large projects, that's projects pursuing Article 80B entitlement or a single large building. This means potentially 3 meetings. An initial review, which today we call an introduction, that would occur as early as possible after that first public meeting. An interim review, which would be subcommittee, which would be aligned with kind of concept development. And then a final review, that's when the project is referred back to full commission for final recommendations that would be aligned with a kind of schematic level of development right before board action, aligned with an EPNF or DPIR filing. For much larger projects pursuing a master plan entitlement, that's Article 80C or 80D for institutional master plans, we want to explore a 5-meeting limit, except for the sort of very large of these master plans. I'm thinking about like the Suffolk Downses, or maybe the Gillettes of the world that are much larger than a typical master plan might even be, where we work with our chairs and Diana and Napor to create a kind of custom roadmap for these outlier projects to give the proponent teams some much needed predictability. These caps on the total number of meeting limits relies fundamentally on the previous recommendation that the commission sort of gets comfortable with the idea of issuing the sort of needed modification recommendation, right? It would be very uncomfortable if at the end of 3 meetings, if you didn't support actually support the proposed project, that you would be kind of in a culture of recommendation of approval. So we think that this needed modification and these meeting limits really do kind of work hand in hand in that way. And the last recommendation, next slide, Lizzie, would be to increase the threshold for review. So as we all know, development trends have pushed up average building sizes, and over time, 100,000 square feet just basically ain't what it used to be. And so we are recommending, because the sort of total project size averages have increased, the total number of projects that the commission has been asked to review annually has increased as well. And without asking for more time from the commissioners, meetings like tonight notwithstanding, where the meeting is going 4 hours long, we need to find a way to sort of create time and space for the, most impactful, most civically important projects among us, for which size is but one sort of indicator. So we are recommending to increase the size trigger. This is the compulsory trigger, from 100,000 square feet to 200,000 square feet, while retaining a discretionary trigger, because size is a poor proxy for civically significant. This discretionary trigger stands in for that. It's for projects of special significance that could still be used to send projects that are below the 200,000 square feet to the commission. Making this change, we used the 5-year data set that we shared with you in the fall. Of the 107 projects that we analyzed, 35 of those, or about 1/3, were under this 200,000 square foot trigger, meaning that we would reduce the commission's review pipeline by approximately 1/3, and having kind of an outsized impact on affordable projects. So of the 12 affordable projects, 9 of them, or 75% of them, were under the 200,000 square foot trigger. A question we got frequently, next slide, Lizzie, was what are the features of a project of special significance? And so we dug that out of the text. And right now, Article 28 seems to think it's almost anything. These are the 5 features that describe a project of special significance. So it's in visual proximity of an architectural district within 500 feet is visual proximity, or a visually prominent significant open space, or located in an area of special historic interest, or situated in such a way to have significant impact or on the visual quality of the surrounding area, or a site over an acre. So I think this is something that we want to spend more time thinking and talking about, because this sounds, the way it's written, that a project of special significance could be almost anything, and we don't really think that that's true either. So this is something that we definitely want to come back to with more discussion. We were also asked, next slide, Lizzie. It's hard to think about projects. When I say reduce projects by 1/3, it's really hard to mind map that to projects you would remember in the last 5 years. So we inventoried just the projects you reviewed in the last 6 months. So hopefully these addresses look very familiar to you. This is the 19 projects that were either introduced or received final recommendation in the last 6 months, not necessarily starting and completing, just whether or not it started or completed. And so the bright red line here you're seeing is the break between 100,000 and 200,000 square feet. And so actually 2 of the projects that fell below that trigger, 22 Dry Dock and White Stadium, we would have for ourselves considered these projects of special significance and brought them to the commission anyways. 22 Dry Dock was just an NPC, but it was adding a pedestrian bridge. So even though the GSF was very low, we felt that this was an important feature and worthy of the commission's time. And of course, White Stadium needs no further description of why that was important for the commission to review. However, 10 Malcolm X Boulevard, which was a residential infill project, and 50 Harold Street, which is a 100% affordable project in the South End, would have fallen below the trigger and may not have risen to the project of special significance designation. This represents a 10% decrease in the commission's review pipeline in the last 6 months, which shows us that actually that the commission, for the most part, was reviewing XXL projects in the last 6 months, which I think we all knew to be true anyways. I don't know how many times I had to say, sorry, we're reviewing another IMP this year. But just wanted to share this with you so that you could get a sense of what that would do to the pipeline. And I think with that, Diana, I'll pass it over to you. Lizzie, I think we have just one summary slide here at the end. Perfect.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Christina, Napur, and Kairos for coming tonight and sharing this work with the commission. I think our goal here is to hear from everyone in terms of, how these changes and reforms help to make the review process more predictable and consistent, and also to ensure that we're valuing and exercising the time and effort that you all put into commissioners to best use. So we're really excited about these proposals. We think that they are really thoughtful and would really like to work together with the commission and the Article 80 modernization team, both Napur and Kevin, to move forward with implementing these changes. Our goal is to hear from you all today, to have a public comment period. We're going to be talking to the BSA, the BSLA, and other stakeholders to understand how these recommendations are understood in the public and their impacts to the broader design community. And our goal is to come back to you in April and share some of that feedback and any adjustments, right, to what we presented tonight that would become the baseline for the changes that would become part of our updates to Article 28 and start the work towards operational changes that we hope to codify within bylaws and this training session we really look forward to hosting. So with that, I just want to hand it back to Linda and thank you all for your time this afternoon.
Thank you all. I mean, you've carried us along the way, and so we've seen this now a couple of times, and each time I see it, I'm just so impressed with all the work you all have done and how data rich it's been. All of the different charts, Christina, that you've created around this, and you too, Napur, has been incredible. Diana, a question for you. Because of the late hour, we have lost some of our commissioners tonight. And I'm wondering if, in combination with commissioners that want to share their thoughts now, we also could have another venue for commissioners to reach out, either with things they're noodling on, post discussion, or giving the others an opportunity.
Absolutely. I think we would be more than happy to have informational briefings on this. As Christina has mentioned before, we're also happy to accept anything written, whether it's a letter you want to submit in response to this. We're really here to work with the commission to identify how these reforms help us do a better job in this space and achieve the goals around predictability and transparency. So Linda, I think we welcome both those one-on-one sessions and any sort of written commentary in the form of a comment letter that we can integrate to our process.
Linda, I could give just a 1 minute sort of snapshot of wearing both my hats as Article 80 and BCDC. I think what I'd summarize this too is that clearer outreach, clearer information, and clearer expectations, result in better execution for the community, for the commission, and for sponsors. And that's kind of the big swing thought here. I've been a huge fan for getting the commission's input on the template of what information sponsors should be bringing to us early so that we can feel comfortable streamlining the process, which we could do if we could be very clear to folks about what we wanted to see. And the last project was a great example of that. So the staff has been very supportive of that. I think the other thing is consistency in reviewers is something we do already. We give the floor to those who invested the time to come to the meetings, and others can contribute, but clearly there's context if you've been to 3 meetings and versus seeing it for the first time. I think the CAT role, the key there is the CAT is sort of the tentacle. It's got to be willing, the person has to be willing to reach out into the community and coalesce thoughts and explain projects and be an extension of the project. And I think, it's no thought that there's this sort of super IAG that will streamline things all by themselves unless they are a consensus builder. So anyway, I think, all the thoughts are kind of self-explanatory, but I think they're all ones that we can inform to make the process better, faster, clearer, and more representative of a city that is now quite diverse, quite broad, and multiple communities. So that I'm happy to talk to anyone about, the last 2 years of this. But I would say staff has done an amazing job of trying to build consensus amongst a diverse set of folks, but also hear what's being said and then translate it into actionable steps. So thank you for giving me a minute just to share quite a bit of time invested in this.
Kirk, I think we can collectively share our thanks to you. It was great to have